Oh yeah, what was it?
Nomenclature.
They were children were saying something.
You kids don't understand. I had MySpace when I was your age. Yeah.
Yeah, and what was MySpace? LiveJournal. You remember LiveJournal?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which kind of feels like that's what Substack has become, or that's it's Substack.
Just prettier. It's prettier. It's simpler.
Yeah,
it's got a nice clean interface.
I like Substack right now, but the interface is terrible.
It's
There's
clean.
So many levels you have to dig through to get to certain features. Like it took me. I had to look up how to find my posts.
Just how much money you give them. This is not hard.
Yes, there's that. But no, like
they monetize ease of use.
When you post something on the front page, it just disappears, and you're like, "Where's my posts? Where's the notifications?" And
have you been posting on there now instead of WordPress?
Yeah. Well, I only use WordPress for my podcast. I don't post anything other than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I haven't paid attention.
I mean, I could, but I just don't. At this point, it's not.
You should cross-post there in addition to your Instagram or your Meta stuff. Ugh.
Yeah, I could. Whatever
Gross.
it is. Facebook is mainly just for church and everyone over 60.
Yes. Which is most of the church. So there you go.
Yes, exactly. That's the thing. And so, no, I like it because I can track between social media platforms what demographic I'm hitting because of who likes and shares the post. So things that really good take off on Instagram, I'll get like 5 likes on Facebook and then vice versa. And you're like, oh, okay. I see who I'm catering to today.
Hitting your demographics. I like it. I like it.
Yeah.
Targeted posting.
But no, Substack is, if you're a writer and you like reading, Substack's a great platform for that.
Yeah. Do you read on your tablet? Is that how you do it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't read it on the computer screen. It's just like, I can't read long form on there. I just get bored.
Yeah,
for too many words.
Part.
Not enough pictures.
If I like something,
too many pictures,
I've been using open source
words.
a lot now. Open source library for with Acrobat.
Oh, okay.
Because
I don't know that one.
all the Desert Fathers stuff is available for free on open source library in PDF, and then like the Discarded Image by C.S. Lewis is on there. There's lots of stuff on there for free, and yeah, I just download it to Acrobat, and so I've gotten quite a good library of things on Acrobat now too.
You're talking about Open Library.
Open Library, sorry, not open source.
From
open
Internet
library.
Archive. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've been using it a lot for these kind of rare and out of print books. Or I look it up and it's $185 for the paperback, that deal. So
yeah.
Just go on.
Right.
Yep. Internet Archives and download it.
Well, I know, but Internet Archive, who came after them? Was it Google maybe? I can't remember.
I think so. I think it was Google.
Or was it a publisher? It might have been a publisher came after them. Because they were like, oh, you can't do that.
The entire publishing community probably came after them.
I imagine. Google on behalf of the entire publishing community, likely.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. All right.
But yeah, yesterday, that's where I get my, a lot of my Anglo-Saxon texts I can get from.
You can just pull them up on there? Okay. All right.
Yeah. So I have the first chapter of the Gospel of John now in Anglo-Saxon.
I saw that. I was like, I don't know what you're sending me. I haven't had the mental bandwidth to engage in Anglo-Saxon. I'm sorry, but
no, I'm just mocking. I know. I just sent it to annoy you.
Okay, thank you. Now that we've cleared the
every
air,
once in a while I gotta do that to you. Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know. Am I supposed to read this? I don't know. You're just sending me.
No, you're not. I just sent it to you. Go, huh?
That's like
the Alfred thing I sent to you was interesting. That's why I sent that.
It was. No, the Alfred one was definitely interesting. But we talked to Alfred a little bit. He's a strange guy.
Yeah.
I did not know that. Who's the guy you sent me this morning? That was the brother of Barnabas.
Yeah.
I was like,
today is the commemoration of. Let me see here. Why isn't it not? Oh, here it is, right here. Saint Aristobulus, March 16th, brother of the Apostle Barnabas, numbered among the 70 apostles, made the first bishop of Britain by the Apostle Paul. And as usual, he endured the torments and malice of the pagans who struck him, dragged him through the streets, mocked him, cursed him, and then Aristobulus remained steadfast in the gospel and helped convert many people in Britain. And his influence amongst the Brythonic Celts of that area, they named the area after him, actually, Arwistli. And then this became a small medieval British kingdom and continues to this day as a district. Yep, in the country of Powys, Wales. Yeah,
some of that early Roman colony, or pre-Roman, or it's early Roman colony stuff, right? Or it's pre-Roman. Was he there before the Romans got to Britain? Or is that about the same time? They were already
time.
there at that point. Yeah, at the same time.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, it's the same roads and everything, right?
Just right. Same thing with Patrick.
Jump on the bus.
I just wrote something for 1517 that I don't know if it's going to be published because I haven't heard anything back. But no, that's Patrick's family they were Roman Britons, wealthy Roman Britons.
Yeah. He was taken as a slave.
Where he comes from. So
right. Captured.
And so, no, they were all there. And there's actually an apostle that was there before Patrick got there. And his church is actually still there to this day. It's quite amazing.
That's insane.
It's a good lesson. What is his name? Let me go back on Substack where I saved it. The thing is, though, what you learn from studying these early missionaries is that these guys go out there and let's see here. Where's that church in the wilderness? Here it is. Wells and Bells. Declan. That's it. St. Declan of Ardmore. So Declan was there before Patrick, like I said. And the thing is, so Declan's just there. He's in Ireland. And he builds this, we would call it a chapel, but a church, right? He builds it by hand with stones.
Yeah. And
so he's out there in the middle of nowhere. He's literally at the edge of the world at this point, right? And yet he becomes so well known and so many people come to find him to preach the gospel to them that he leaves his church, he abandons it and goes and lives in a cave to get away from people. And
it was so quiet. What happened?
Yes, exactly. And I think it's a testament, though, to the power of God that you don't have to have a cathedral and be at the center of everything for God to say, no, you. But so for you and I, for example, especially for me, when you labor, like I live in a village, literally, like I was last census, they're like, you're a village now. And you're completely off the beaten path for most people. Mm-hmm. And you think that nothing you're doing, it really has any bearing on the wider church or the world because you're just in your little, cloister. And then you read about guys like Declan or Finian and Columba and so on, who they just built monasteries on islands in the middle of nowhere. And you're like, it's on an island. You have to get on a boat. You have to sail across the ocean and the sea. And
well, it's kind of like a beachhead, though, right, for the gospel?
It is, because with Columba, they said roughly that, tens of thousands of people over the centuries came to study on the island at this collegium that he originally built. Same thing, though, to get away, he went and built his own little hut on the beach and is like, I got to get away from all these people. Unfortunately, the island is only 2 miles around or a mile and a half around, so it's hard to escape.
Right.
But so Declan then, he just moves to this cliff top to get away from all the people that are coming to church. And then, of course, they then go and find him where he's hiding in the cave, in his little, it's the alcove he lives in, the alcove he built for himself. It's enough for a person he built a bench out of stone, a bench, carved it out of stone. It's got a little stone roof. And it's about the size of my bathroom, probably. It's very small. And
austere, they say, right?
Very austere, yes. Mm-hmm. And yet people came and found him, and you realize then that, it doesn't matter where you're at, and it doesn't matter who you are. If God chooses you to preach the gospel to people, he will just bring them to you. And it's almost like the anti-missionary movement. These guys went in there as missionaries with the gospel, got persecuted, got attacked, got imprisoned. Like Patrick always had to carry a weapon with him because people were constantly trying to kill him for preaching the gospel and trying to, take the serpent out of Ireland. And then at a certain point, though, it flips on itself. People have converted, and now they're saying, get away. They're like wartime missionaries, right? They're like wartime fighters. They're like, we're great in war, but we're terrible in peace. We can't.
I get that sense from the apostles in Jerusalem, though. In contrast with Paul, who's like, "Hey, war is good," right? And they're like,
"Right,
let's keep this tight, right? Tight knit group. Yeah. We need a tight knit group. We don't need a big group, right? We're happy here,
right?"
Yeah.
And so I think it's as you get older, for those of you listening who aren't of an age yet, past 40, let's say, or past 50, you get to a certain a certain age, especially in ministry, and you and I've seen this with older guys that are near or after retirement age.
Yeah.
Where you start looking over your shoulder and asking the question, like, what have I accomplished? And it's a very dangerous time, actually, spiritually speaking.
I think so.
Because the temptation then is I need to do something to literally build my legacy. And we do it under the cover of piety and under the cover of the church. But we have to be very careful when we start talking in language of building something.
Because capital campaign, often, right? This time,
right? Again, we're building a new earth, a new heavens and earth adjacent to reality a lot of the time. Right. But because it's under the cover of the church, sometimes it's the actual church building. People look at it and go, "No, that's good. That's godly. Look at him. He's serving the mission of the gospel. It's outreach. It's evangelism. It's insert pious church talk here." Right. Versus, okay, but what's wrong with what's already there? Because here are these guys living in caves, living in little alcoves that they carved for themselves, and that was enough. And they didn't, history doesn't.
Didn't you send me something about legacy? And maybe I was having a conversation with someone else. It's like, better to be forgotten than to be remembered. Mm-hmm. What did you send me about that?
Yeah,
because if you're remembered, it's probably not for the reasons you would hope.
Right. Well, you're remembered for driving snakes out of Ireland, and then people come along and go, but there are no snakes in Ireland.
Right. Well, that was probably the context you were talking about. Yeah.
And it's like, well, but what about all the other really cool things that he did that are actually more relevant and not as trivial?
Like faithfully preaching and teaching, right?
Yeah.
That's not trivial. It seems like it because it's mundane or ordinary. That was probably I think you mentioned something about ordinary. We had that in the...
Yeah, that's what we were talking about. It's like, be happy to be ordinary, because ordinary is, well, that's what God actually ordained for you to be, is ordinary.
Right. Well, that's helpfully then, divine service liturgy is called the ordinary. It's meant to be ordinary, This is what we ordinarily do. It's not just ordained, but ordered, right?
You're right.
Mm-hmm. There's freedom within that, of course, but it is ordered.
So, yeah, it's also I noticed Wade Johnson, our friend Wade, posted yesterday. He said, I don't know if he's been listening to us or it's just in the air, but he said the number one temptation is acedia, is akadeia. And I was like, have you been listening to our podcast, or is it just in the air right now?
Maybe. It's a Lenten thing, definitely.
There we go.
That kind of malaise or apathy. It's all
busybodiness, though, is the other side, remember? Being a busybody, always having to be doing something, building. And
fixing,
that's what I mean.
Working, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's a very, very dangerous place to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess mostly because you're presuming a result. That's the first problem, right? Without a promise, so you're just doing what you want to do, what's right in your own eyes, under the guise or pretext of this is godly
and that's
or
what I mean.
pious.
It's always dangerous then when you start functioning under that assumption that I need to do something. Well, basically, what you're saying is I need to erect a statue for myself so that people know I was here.
Did you see the one that they built for Mao? It's like it's like the largest statue in the world now. 600 some feet. It's like 3 times the height of the Statue of Liberty.
Yeah,
and it's just like the buildings are all crumbling around it, but there's this massive statue, and you're like, okay, well, that's impressive. Well done.
Priorities, man.
You could live in that, I guess.
There we go. That'd be kind of cool, actually. Bunch of Chinese peasants living inside the body of Mao.
There is kind of this strange desperation that your memory live on, and that's not just.
It's been
hitting
me hard the last 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you go through this, but from time to time, my brain will just unlock a blizzard of memories that I forgot. And this week in particular, I've been waking up in the morning and just being bombarded with memories. I'm like, oh, I remember that, or oh, I remember that. And it is a very dangerous place to be because it does make me wistful. And it makes me want to go back, sober now. Yeah. But I want to go back to 1994, 1995, 1996. right? Because like I sent you that list of like the top albums per month in the 90s.
I didn't watch it yet, but yeah.
And I can, and one with every album, I can tell you exactly where I was at when that album came out and I was listening to it. And so all the member berries, I'm just feasting on member berries at that point.
Is that what they call it? Okay.
Yeah, from Rick and Morty, the member berries. And it just sucked me back to that moment, almost to the point actually the other day where I could actually smell like my memory. Because I remember exactly where I was at the spring that album came out, and I knew where I was at when I was listening to that song for the first time. And it's like, man, if I could just go back to that time. And you're like, but you can't, and you forget all the other things. Because the reason that those times are so good is because you didn't know. That's the thing. You were naive. Like we were just talking about before we hit record, is when you're 23, 22, 21, you're right on the edge of asking the big questions, but you're not quite there yet.
Right.
And so it's a very, like, for me anyways, 22, 23, 24 was a very heady time where everything was just, 1,000 miles an hour. Everything was at the height of
well, you were probably running 1,000 miles per hour too, right? I mean, as far as what you were doing. For sure.
Yeah, left, right, and center. And so you look back on those times and you think to yourself, yeah, I was freer back then. And it's like, yeah, you were actually, because you knew less. Naivety, there's a built-in freedom with naivety. Watch children. Children don't know the consequences of walking on the railing, for example, or climbing trees and whatnot, right? And so you look back and go, man, I was so free. It's like, yeah, because you were in so much danger, but you didn't know you were in danger. And unfortunately, for me, as you get older, you become aware of the danger and it makes you restrict. It makes you more conservative. And so I think the wistfulness, the nostalgia is, I wish there was a time when I was naive so that I didn't have to know what I know now about the world and about consequences. Because when you're 23, consequences are, I could put consequences in my back pocket when I was 23. Whereas, I remember I went into a bank because I was bouncing checks left and right and center all over the place. And the third bank that I was at that time called me in and she sat me down and she like threatened me. And I'm like, go ahead, take everything I have. Because you know what I have? I have nothing. I have no assets. I have no money in my bank account, as you know.
Right.
I don't have anything. So go ahead, take it. Oh, you can take me to court? Fine. Go for it. I won't show up. And so she just kicked me out of the bank. She's like, just get out of here. You can't have an account. Like, I can do that at 23. If I did that today, bad news.
Yeah. Well, you're responsible.
Well, there's consequences. And I know what they are. Yeah. And there's people that depend on me. That's the difference too. Yeah. When I was 23, there was almost no one that depended on me for anything.
Right. But you could be tried as an adult at that point. I mean, that's the problem.
I could have. And I did go to court, and there was a bench warrant out for my arrest for a number of years in my 20s. Luckily, I was in another country when that was happening for the most part. But what you don't realize, again, when you're 23 is there are actually people who are depending on you, but you're too naive and too self-involved to realize there are lots of people that depend on you to show up for work, to show up to be their friend, to show up at holiday, events for family. Like there's a lot of responsibility on you. But you're too naive to recognize it. And even if you do, you're like, I'm not going to pick that up because I have to be free. And so I still want to be free now. It's just as I get older, that door closes in my face more than often than not. Because I don't really have a choice about being free like I used to, because I look at people that are my age that are free and I'm like, you're disgusting. You're pitiful. Like you abandoned your responsibilities. You walked away from family. You walked away from people that needed you to show up. Versus when I was 23, I was like, I don't care.
Yeah. And I suppose I never quite rejected the idea of ordered liberty, that there's freedom within the order that the Lord has established, right? I never completely rejected that, but certainly push the boundaries as you do.
Right. Well, that's the time when you do it, right? Because you get to, quote unquote, make choices for yourself for the first time when you're at college and so on.
Well, that's what I described the second temptation in the wilderness, right, of Satan. It's like, well, throw yourself down and see what God does. Like
exactly.
You could do that, but
right.
Maybe you shouldn't test the boundaries actually that the Lord has established. It's not going to go well for you. Yeah.
Right. But I was even talking to the kids this morning because somebody asked, it was Annie or one of the kids said, what's your favorite coffee shop? And we just started kind of listing off our favorite coffee shops. And I used to live above a coffee shop. When I got out of college, and in St. Paul, I lived in an apartment above a coffee shop. And so for 2 years, that was my clubhouse. That's where we all hung out at.
Yeah, just go downstairs, right?
Yeah, it was fantastic. And it was so cool because my friends would just pull up to the curb and get out of the car and just yell up at me. And then I'd wake up and throw some clothes on and go downstairs, and we'd have coffee and smoke cigarettes. But the thing was, like I was talking about when I lived in Portland in 97, 98, one, you could still smoke. And so you would go to Dunn Brothers or you'd go to Coffee Time, and you just sit on the sidewalk outside and just socialize with strangers, because there'd be like 30 to 40 people having coffee, smoking cigarettes. And in Portland in 97, it was liberal, but it wasn't even close to what it is today. And it was more like a kind of hippie-ish vibe, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so there was no violence. There was protesting and activism, but it was all actually,
but
nice.
it was weird Portland. It wasn't.
Yeah, it was weird. It was weird.
It wasn't insane.
Violent.
Yeah.
Right. Like even the homeless people and whatnot would just hang out with you on the sidewalk, and you just talk with them and share a cigarette or buy them a cup of coffee and just hang out. Because at that time, again, the difference between a college student and a homeless person in Portland was almost indistinguishable.
Yeah.
You didn't know. But there was a different vibe. And again, the temptation is to fall down that memory hole and think, oh man, it was so much better back then.
There's your remember berries again. Okay.
And it's like, it was better because you were naive and you didn't know. That's all.
Yeah. I asked the question to somebody this week though, who's near 90. I said, do you think people trust people less today? Because I mean, trust is an essential element of society. Yeah, and they were like, oh no, absolutely. Yeah. Because the person had the front door shot here in Random Lake, a village of 1,500.
Right.
It's like, how did a 9mm slug go through your door into your door? Like, why did they shoot it? Why were they didn't shoot it? It probably wasn't shot at. It just incidentally went into that house. I'm like, and everybody is like, this is weird. And you're like. And it's like, well, how do you live with a neighbor that like even accidentally shot a bullet towards your house, right?
Well, and even when we lived in the apartment I lived in Portland, it was a high rise, and we never locked our doors except when you went to bed at night, because everybody on the level that you lived on, we knew each other, and we would hang out outside. Again, you'd go outside to smoke, you'd climb up on the roof of the building, you'd have like little parties with the people that lived on that level with you, and you had nothing in common with them other than we were all just young and poor. But yeah, you just walk in and out of people's apartments like it was a dorm, because you're in that transition phase from college life to adult life. So you're still kind of there on that threshold. And I had friends that I just met because they lived next door to me, and we just hung out and listened to music and went for coffee and whatnot. But the thing we had in common is we were poor, and so we had a lot of free time. And so we hung out, and you just go on adventures and have experiences, and that's how you form friendships. And my kids don't have that now.
Right, but is that
internet and because of
was that a trust relationship, or was that just that naivete that you were talking about?
Both. Both. It was both.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. But I think that's where trust this is the thing about trust. It's weird this way, that it almost always starts that way. It's like you just give the benefit of the doubt and until they betray the trust, and then
absolutely.
Then the naivete is shattered, and you're like, okay, you're gonna have to earn trust now. No, I can't just give it to you. Yeah. Right. But it seems culturally we're to the point where, no, we're not going to give benefit of the doubt anymore. We're just going to assume that you're hostile, and that you want what's not good but what's wrong. And,
well, then we're
antagonistic.
Right. The main narrative in the 90s was one of optimism.
Yeah, that's true.
And if there were enemies, they were external, and the message was like, we have to stick together because out there somewhere is an enemy.
Muslim hordes, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the Muslim warlords. And so it wasn't the enemy is inside, the enemy is over there somewhere and it wants to come in and disrupt this, versus now it's, no, the enemy is here. It's your neighbor.
It's mouse, right? The enemy is us.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And we saw this in 2020, obviously, in spades. And the lack of self-reflection, socially speaking, I think is the thing that I notice most now, is that nobody wants to reflect on the consequences of 2020 and 2021.
Well, never mind 40 years of easy money and just destruction of society in the process.
Yeah.
like of merit and of work and of integrity of family.
One of my students, Annie and I have gotten addicted to Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Fantastic.
I haven't watched it. Is it funny?
Oh, it's laugh out loud funny. And for a network show, it's just I'm like,
it was Fox,
how
right?
is this?
It was on Fox.
Yes. But we're just into season 3 now. But I guess one of my students who's watched the whole series now on Netflix, well, the first 4 seasons, is that after George Floyd dies, the entire tone of the show shifts.
Oh, yeah, makes sense though.
That was my exact response. And that's what I mean, though, is that socially, culturally, everything then pivoted in 2020 and through 2021. And we refuse to acknowledge the consequences. And this is what disturbs me, is the complete lack of reflection, that we can't just step back and go, well, wait a minute, before this, what was life like? And now after this, what is life like?
Well, that's why, I mean, you reminded me, and I had never watched Northern Exposure, but you said it was on Amazon. So we started watching it, and it really, I mean, it is funny, but it's also very bizarre, because it's like, I remember that. I remember living, I remember having a world like that, but it's not that world anymore. It's not that world anymore, where it's just like, there's just people and they kind of respect each other, but there's boundary issues, of course, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Normal human interaction stuff. It's normal human interaction.
Yeah.
Even though, obviously it's one of those shows of, let's throw a bunch of different people together and see what happens kind of stories. But
no, it's a phenomenal show for that reason. And it also reminds you that there was a time when you could make a show that was weird.
But also they reconcile with each other consistently. There's a conflict, and then conflict resolves. And it's a form of forgiveness, I suppose. But it's like, okay, you can be the DJ again. You're like,
right, yeah,
that all happened in one episode. Yeah, well, yeah, now he's back.
Right, exactly. Speaking of not trusting, it's like whenever anybody pulls through town or pulls into my parking lot, and I'm like, I don't recognize your car. Who are you?
I have the same problem right out the window.
But no, it's a different time. And again, it can be a temptation to think to yourself, man, I wish we could get that back. It's like, well, A, that's a fiction. I've been to Alaska. That place doesn't exist. Second,
it did, but it doesn't anymore. No.
Right. But whatever it was at the time is, you can't repristinate the past. I was talking with Adam about this on Tuesday, is you have to be very careful when you study history that you don't go back there and think to yourself, well, I'm going to recover this and I'm going to repristinate this, or on the show yesterday.
Well, this is what we struggle with this all the time, because we're going to read Ambrose, but we read, who did we read last week? Chrysostom, right?
Yeah, Who did we read?
Cyril.
Medieval?
Cyril of Jerusalem. Cyril of Jerusalem,
and then John Cassian.
And we talked about this. You can't go to that. We can't put ourselves in that context. We're not in that context. We don't have a hostile Roman government or whatever it is, right? I mean, we have a hostile government, but they're not Romans.
You can accept their worldview as a student. You can accept it. It's like, again, reading The Discarded Image and being a student of the Middle Ages and learning their cosmology and their worldview and placing yourself under their authority so you can understand why they're saying what they're saying. But that's as far as it can go, is you can only say, okay, I understand why you said this based on this information, but I didn't live it. I didn't experience it. So I'm always a viewer. I'm always a passenger. I'm never going to have any kind of agency.
Yeah, and barring like a major societal collapse, it's not going to be easy to go back to a mythological world. I mean, you and I can do it because we're kind of weird. I'm not sure how many people come along for the ride. They're like, what are you doing with this cosmology? Well,
to your point, because I was reading this in Tolkien on fairy tales yesterday, and I talked about it on my show, is that Tolkien warns that when you approach the door to these other worlds, you have to be very serious and very sober before you step through, because he points out, number one, if you step through the door into fairy, don't be surprised when someone comes along and shuts the door behind you and you end up trapped in the land of fairy.
I was say you get lost there. Right?
It's very serious. Number two, that's why every story ends with they came back after 100 years and everyone they knew was dead. Like that's the actual conclusion to most of those stories.
Rip Van Winkle, that's a big one, right?
Exactly. Yeah. The second thing he warns of is, even if you do come back from whatever other world you go to, you will never fit in again with the society that you left. And he's not talking in a fanciful way. He's talking very seriously about himself, for example, and Lewis and others, MacDonald, is when you go to another world, whether it be like Beowulf, you go back to the 8th, 7th, 6th century, and you set up shop there and you live with those people, and they teach you their language, they teach you their customs, they teach you their myths and their stories. When you come back, like literally you just pull yourself out of the text and walk out the door, all of a sudden everyone's speaking differently than you are. And everyone, and you look at people and you're like, wait, I know you. I've known you for 20 plus years, but for some reason, it's almost as if something's changed. It's like, yeah, something has changed. You went to another world and you came back.
When you read fiction, it does that. I mean, it's like you're enchanted, then disenchanted, enchanted,
correct.
disenchanted,
Exactly.
back and forth.
And that's his point too, is because if you are the one who's seeking to re-enchant the world and you're the one who is now walking through that door into myth, you're now a part of it though. That's the thing. You're a part of that myth. You've been made a part of it. And you chose that without fully realizing the consequences. Even if you say, I'm going to accept the consequences, you don't know yet. You're too naive. But then once you go through the door, now you're no longer naive. Now you come back and you're different. And everyone else knows you're different. And you know everyone knows you're different. And there's nothing you can do to change that.
I mean, we talked about this with Great Art last week. And, you know, whether you agree with the messaging of the Dune Part 2 movie, I mean, it does. I mean, you talk about it afterwards. I always
Have you seen the meme that's going around now?
No.
It says Dune, and then the subtitle is Paul Atreides is evil. And then Dune 2, you didn't get the first message. Paul Atreides is evil.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thankfully, they really do convey that at the end.
And then, of course, his son is so much worse than he is.
Well, they dropped him from the movie. Leto the second?
Yeah. I wonder if they'll bring him in the third. I mean,
I don't know.
That's a whole different thing, though. Like what Leto goes through, you're like, I read the books
a whole
other series.
Like 3 years ago now. So I don't remember when he and Chani have Leto and how that works with the
he has Leto, but then he goes off and then he has the other two, the twins that he has, like Leto the second, so to speak, and his sister. And of course Leto goes and merges. Right. But and by the way, everybody pour out a glass of your finest 40-ounce malt liquor for the Silmarillion. Amazon bought it. Sold in the middle of the night.
The rights to produce
J.R.
it?
Tolkien's grandson, Simon, is a complete and total piece of garbage and sold the rights to the Silmarillion to Amazon.
Well, we knew that was going to happen because of what they did to the conference every year, the Tolkien Society or whatever it's called. Once Christopher died, then it was all gender.
Yeah, it's over.
Gender or
it just
equality
that,
or
you're
whatever.
Like, Christopher Tolkien is on the Mount Rushmore of sons. Like, he's one of the greatest sons to ever son. Like, he's the best. And then you look at Simon and you're like, what happened? When
it's not just Simon either. I mean, is he the executor? But I understand it's all the children, all the grandchildren.
Well, of course they are, because they don't care. They didn't grow up. They grew up in wealth. They grew up with the legend, and they hate the legend, and they're a part of this new generation that needs to tear down their legends.
Well,
it's disgusting.
So this is a helpful lesson for those who think that legacy actually matters.
Right.
I mean, you can fix whatever kind of. I mean, Tolkien said a few things, right, about what he thought about this and that. It doesn't matter. They're not going to respect that legacy. Yeah.
Right. Well, because again, there we are. Is in the discussion about fairy stories, Tolkien points out the reason that we don't interact with the fairy like they used to is because we just got in the terrible habit of trying to enslave them. That's kind of the thing, right? And we see this biblically speaking is that by the time we get to Deuteronomy, they're interfacing with demons all the time. They're very comfortable doing this. And to the point, and Cat Williams, of all people pointing this out, is like when Plato and others refer to Atlantis just kind of off, like just informally, like, Atlantis, you can tell by the way they're writing that it's an assumed cultural reference point that they don't have to explain Atlantis because everyone knows what it is. In the Bible,
whether it's real or they've been there or any of that, it doesn't. Right.
It's just everybody knows Atlantis. Everyone's aware of it. It's part of the cultural idiom, right? Like everyone knows where it's at, though, because Plato even says it's over there, and everyone's like, "Yeah, of course it's over there."
Yeah, Mauritania. Thank you.
Yeah, and there's a whole side note, by the way, to Mauritania, because all of a sudden now, like, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on out there, like they're building stuff.
They're figuring out. They're gonna re-greenify it or whatever. They're gonna get the water there and
this whole thing. But it's the same thing biblically, is that they just refer to things so offhandedly that when I include them in my Wednesday night sermons, people will ask me, like, what was that? I'm like, it's right there in the Bible. It's like right here in Joshua, or Judges, or First Samuel.
I was like, where did you pull these things out?
Yeah.
Because I don't remember anything about them either.
Exactly, because one, they're not translated so that it's explicit. So you have to translate the names of places. You have to, like the witch kings of Sidon were literally witch kings. They were literally Nachash, right? Nachash Melech. And once you go, well, why didn't they translate this as sorcerer, like witch kings? Like this, you have to do that because it establishes a tradition going back to the tree.
Well, it explains why they didn't want to go through there.
Correct.
They wanted to go around.
Right.
This is not a good place to go.
Right. But you realize, like, no, these people are, like, it's just, this is what they do, right? It's just normal for them to consort. Like, even Solomon is consorting with these spirits. He's consorting with Moloch and Ashtaroth and these other gods, Malcolm and whatnot. And
he's about as what do you call, what's the word today? Polyamorous.
Yes, he is polyamorous
with his
as well as
with his gods. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, this makes a lot more sense now why God's so angry all the time. But it's the same thing then, is that you're interfacing now with the world. I warned everybody. I warned them before Lent. I said, I'm going to present this as a mythic story, but I'm only going to use the biblical text. And the mythic part of this is the fact that when I say these things, you're going to go, well, that's not in the Bible. And then I'm going to point to the text and you're going to say, oh, that is in the Bible. And I'm like, this is why you don't read the Bible, because you don't think it's fantastic. But once you read it this way, you realize it's super fantastic. But now you can't talk to other Christians. That's the thing. Now you can't, because you went through a door into another world. So when people are like, no, you have to have a biblical worldview, I'm like, you don't even know what you're asking for.
Oh, yeah. And even some like well-known stories. Like, what did I throw out the other day? I was just saying, Elijah, he slayed the prophets of Baal and their blood ran in the brook. And they're like, what?
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, no. Or you could do the she-bears or some story like that. And you're like, what are you talking about? He told the female bears to go and maul the children?
Right.
What could that possibly mean? I mean, that's, of course, where we go with it, right?
That's the question. And that's where the danger lies, is once you find out what the actual symbolic meaning of that moment is. We were reading the end of 2 Samuel in chapel, and they go through the mighty men of David, right? Like even David, like David's court recorder, his scribe, right, is so dangerous that even if David's like, you nerd, go fight, like he's scarier than everybody else in the room. And then you read about David's mighty men that are numbered amongst the 70, and you're like, holy crap, like these guys killed how many people at one time by themselves? And you're like, that's why they are mighty. And then you go, though, deeper into the whole term mighty men. And that's a whole other thing now, because that term mighty men actually refers to giants, and it refers to men who are gigantic, not only in stature, but just in deeds, right? And this is what's been lost. And so, yeah.
That's true. That's true of even of David before he's anointed, right? When he's just out with the sheep.
Well, it's
there's legends attached to him.
Yeah. Well, like when we got to Absalom's revolution, and my oldest is like, so let me get this straight. You chased a warlord into the desert because you thought that's where you were going to trap him and kill him. Did your dad never tell you stories about what it was like before you were born and he lived out in the desert as a warlord?
Right.
Like, are you
conspiring with the Philistines, which is kind of
exactly
amazing. It's like what? David conspired with the Philistines? Yeah, no, he worked with them.
And then he would go out in the day and kill Philistines.
Then he turns around and kills them too. It's like, oh wow,
it's fantastic.
Okay. That's our David. Okay.
That's our David. And of course his last words, right? Blood on his gray head as he goes to the grave. But no, Tolkien was aware of that because he's living in the first generation of people who read Max Weber's essay on de-enchantment and took it very seriously. He attacks Max Mueller, for example, On Fairy Tales, who's another German from the 19th century. And he's the one responsible for saying things like, all gods are based on the planets, and all the planets are, we project our adjectives onto these things, right?
Lewis clearly recognized that. Yeah. And
so and in this Garden Image, he attacks that same move by Max Mueller. And again, those damn Germans. But the Germans were primarily the ones for tearing down the ancient worldview. They were the Enlightenment philosophers and theologians who are like, we got to get rid of this. It's messy. It's illogical.
The most pagan of pagans at one point.
And
Complete flip.
Which then, when you jump forward to the 30s and 40s, you understand how the myth of the Aryan race came to be, because all these previous German scholars had flattened out reality. So it was just ripe for a new myth.
But that people never stopped actually
Correct.
looking for it or wanting it. Or yeah.
No, 100%. So yeah, when you hold up Woden again to people, they're like, I know this. I like this. This is good. Let's go back through the story. Which is the point then of, if people today were were trained in this way, and they're not, unfortunately, but we don't know what symbol is. We don't know what meaning is, because we've actually had it taught out of us for generations. But
or idol.
This is why
right? what an idol is. Yeah.
Right. This is why, to your point then, this is why when you point out like this music video is satanic or this is cultic, and people are like, no, it's not. They're just trying to do it to get attention. I'm like, that's just you're being materialistic.
Sure.
Yes.
Sure.
Again, yeah, on the materialistic level, yes, they are getting your attention. That's
but they also think it has power over people.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And even if they don't know it has power and don't think it does, that doesn't change objective reality, which is it does.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Puppets don't have to know that there's a guy with his hand up their bottom to be a puppet. Right. Kermit doesn't have to know Jim Henson's pulling the strings, but he is.
The Muppets aren't as creepy. Some of those other puppets, man.
Yeah.
There's something about it, right? I saw one where it was a tiger, and it had two operators. One that operated the head, and then the other that operated the backside. And it was very realistic. It was like, wow, that's creepy, right? Because it's too close. It's that uncanny valley kind of thing. So maybe myth hides us from the false reality by being crazy, a little bit too crazy to be recognized as reality.
No, I think it's the opposite, actually.
You think so?
Yeah.
You think it actually bridges the valley, actually?
Well, it just opens up reality for you to see the trivial from the permanent and from the true. And
like Patrick opening up purgatory.
Yeah, there you go. That story. So weird.
Just like, okay, then.
Yeah.
That's nice. Lots of Patrick stuff this time of year.
What the Enlightenment and what the Neoclassicists did, for example, is they built a wall around us to separate us from the spirits. And then they said there are no spirits. And then they realized, oh, this is effective. Let's build the wall a little higher, a little thicker to keep God out too.
And then the spirits come and take possession of them.
Well, I think it was Pajot who said it. He's like, when the cracks open in the wall, and they do because you can't hold that back, right? It's like Luther says in The Bondage of the Will, one fallen angel is more powerful than all of the men on earth combined. But Pajot's point is that when you build a wall around yourself to protect you from the spirits, and then those cracks start to open up, the cracks only open up from the bottom out. They don't open up from the top down. And so the only thing that's going to come up through those cracks is, like in Pacific Rim, actually, is the perfect example, because they're literally coming out of the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah.
The only thing that's coming are monsters. That's why we have chimeras and succubi in the public square now, like we were talking about with the OnlyFans. Like OnlyFans is literally the legitimization and the commodification of succubi. That's what it is. That's what pornography is. Pornography is the legitimization of succubus. And then we pay them to actually steal our souls. And the chimeras are the trans people. Because read the definition of a chimera, right? This combination, this alteration of one thing into two things simultaneously. And
I mean, the closest thing to a succubus that people probably know, I was just thinking how many people actually know what that is, as like the Dementors maybe from Harry Potter, right? Just to suck out your soul. Except those aren't sexual, right? So that's a little different.
A demon or supernatural entity in folklore in female form that appears in dreams to seduce men through sexual activity.
Put it in the chat too.
A succubus needs semen to survive. Repeated sexual activity with a succubus will result in a bond being formed between the succubus and the man, and the succubus will drain or harm the man with whom she is having intercourse. There is also incubi, just so you know. That's a succubus. And a chimera, and I'm just doing this so that when we put the audio at the end of this show, people know. A chimera, chemically, this is interesting that the scientific community co-opted it, an organism or part consisting of two or more tissues of different genetic composition, produced as a result of an organ transplant, grafting, or genetic engineering. However, the original meaning, it is an imaginary monster compounded of incongruous parts. It is a fire-breathing she-monster in Greek myth, having the head of a lion, the body of a goat, and the serpent's tail.
I'm reading all the folklore stuff. This is, wow.
When you carve yourself up and attempt to make yourself into something other than,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's a chimera. You're a chimera. That's what you're doing. And so people say then, well, yeah, but those are just myths. And I'm like, yeah, myth is reality. That's the point.
We're
That's
making
what
it
myth
real.
is. It's the
Yeah.
well, no, it's like I said, you can try to remake creation adjacent to creation, but eventually reality snaps back on you and says, no, 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 no. You're going to come back in here where you belong.
Well,
And that's when
this
everything's
is
revealed.
So this is why we have the expression "trans is beautiful," right?
Yes.
I mean, we don't, but it's out there, and it has to be.
Right.
It can't just be accepted; it has to be celebrated because it has to be an object of worship, right? We're talking about a mythological. It's a demon, but worth worshiping. Or at least reverencing, I guess, because of the fear and the terror of it.
Well, you have to because of the fear. Exactly. It's like the Minotaur. We all know it's dangerous and it's going to kill you, but we better revere it. And in the revering of it, we can at least, again, build a wall around ourselves that hopefully protects us.
So you cut them up, you give them chemicals, and you arm them, and now they're definitely objects of fear. Like if they walk into a school, for example, or whatever. We've seen that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no. When we go to the children's hospital, the receptionist is trans with his
told me
beard.
that. That's so weird.
And it's like, make a choice. Which one are you? Right?
No, they want to be in that liminal space between reality and fiction, I guess.
Right.
As if there is such a thing.
And to your point, then, what it actually does is it actually raises awareness of reality. It doesn't negate reality. It actually heightens reality. And that's the thing. And in the old days, this is why you had Carnival. This is why you had festivals where you were allowed to cut loose. Fat Tuesday, right?
Well, that was Carnival I was thinking about, the puppets, right? Because that's a big deal with that. Yeah, the big ones.
And over time, then, we decided, what would be cool is if every day was Carnival. Every day we blew off steam. Every day we let our sins out. And it turns out...
Yeah.
And it turns out that reality isn't designed that way. And so what ends up happening...
Well, because it's violent, right? And so there's a violent response
it's not good,
eventually.
It's not beautiful, it's not true. Yeah. That's why you do it, though. You do it to vent out those things so that you can remind everybody publicly, this isn't good, this isn't beautiful, this isn't true. This is why we only do it once in a while. Right? We just get it all out, put it on the goat, send them out in the wilderness, and then we go back to life. You can't do this.
I never watched The Purge, but it sounds like The Purge to me.
Sure, absolutely.
The premise.
Once a year.
Yeah.
Everything's on the table. You got a problem with your neighbor? Do it now. Because that's sun up, right?
Right, which is an inverted form of the year of Jubilee, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Instead of debt forgiveness, it's actually you're actually putting a debt on your conscience.
Once you understand, I was explaining this to my student last night. Once you understand the fundamental activity, the fundamental symbolism and meaning of ritual, rite, which is we need an altar, we need a sacrifice, and we need blood. These are we need this. This is for the ritual. We need these three components. So now find your altar. Sometimes it's an actual table. Sometimes it's a bed, right? In the temple of Dionysius, there were beds for the prostitutes.
Or an operating table, I suppose.
And I was an operating table as an altar. Sometimes it's an actual stone altar out in the garden. Because, again, garden covers everything where there's vegetation growing in a group. So like a woods, a forest is a garden. This is why they meet in the woods or on top of mountains. And so, for example, then, and I was addressing sexual abuse, is that you have an altar, it's the bed, and you have a sacrifice, it's the child, and then there has to be the shedding of blood, it's the breaking of the hymen. This is a sacramental act. It's a satanic, demonic sacramental act because all of the magic, all of the sorcery, all of the rites in the Bible are sex magic, right? They're ritual sex magic, blood sex magic, which is ironic because the Chili Peppers have an album called Blood Sex Magic.
I couldn't think of it, yes.
Yeah, and that's not a coincidence either once you find out about Anthony Kiedis' activities.
Nope.
And at that time, so now you have blood, you have sex, you have magic, sorcery, Nachash, the serpent, divinization. Now that you understand the fundamentals of the rite, you understand the inversion of the sacrament, now you can look at things that people are doing and say, oh, you're enacting a rite. You're inviting in these spirits because the ritual invites the spirits in. This is why cutting is so dangerous because you're literally opening your body up. You're shedding blood and you're opening your flesh to be invaded, infiltrated by these spirits. and you have to feed them. This is why succubi feed on semen, right? And you say, well, this is just a myth. Yeah, myths are the revelation of the greater reality in story form, because this is the only way we can comprehend the greater reality. But once you recognize
like we said, like a half hour ago, right? They wouldn't persist if they didn't reflect reality.
Exactly. They calcify around like truth calcifies over time.
Yeah.
That's why it's unbreakable. That's why at a certain point, you have to stand up and say, abortion is not a choice. It's a ritual act. It's an anti-sacrament.
Of demonic possession and...
Exactly. It's anti-sacramental. You have an actual altar. The headquarters is an actual ziggurat. It's right there in plain sight. But because we haven't been taught to recognize symbol and meaning, we can walk right by it every day and go like, it's just a building of glass and steel. It's nothing more than that. I was like, no, you're blind to what's right in front of your eyes. You don't have to go looking for secret hidden things. It's right there in front of you.
So, I mean, this is probably a complex idea for maybe even for our listeners that the Bible reveals reality, right? But so do other stories, just in an incomplete way. But I don't think that's how people think about it. They think of these other stories as being invaders into reality and teaching falsehood, like a false reality. You're like,
it's a metaphor.
Yeah, right. Or something like that. Yeah. And that's not, I mean, it is truth versus fiction. There is a sense of that. But the fiction wouldn't be believable if it didn't correspond in some way to what's real, just incompletely or inverted.
All fairy tales, all legends are a repeat of the original stories in the Bible. Even Rapunzel is a repeat of the fall. Humpty Dumpty is a repeat of the fall into sin. It's all a repetition of the same stories. But like you noted, over time, what happens is that the truth calcifies, the fall, and the sin and the inability to get back to the garden, get back up on top of the wall, the mountain, that persists. The covering, Rapunzel's hair is a covering, right? This is what this is. It's cover, it's protection, it's disguise. Like all the elements of the original story are there. They calcify and they stay. But the details change over time because, like Tolkien says, it's like soup, right? Everybody that comes in the kitchen adds a little bit of their own spice or their ingredients to the soup, but it's still the same soup. It's still soup. And when you serve the soup then to someone, they don't want to be taken in the back and shown the carcass of the cow that you killed to make the cube steak that went in the soup. They just want to drink. They just want to drink and eat the soup. And his point is like what modernity has done is said, we just want to see the carcass.
Yeah.
And it's like, but the carcass isn't the point. The soup is. You have to take the soup and you have to consume it to understand like this is the end product, right? This is what we're here for. And what we end up doing, like we were not talking about, like after the scientific enlightenment, is like science is very important. It's very relevant, actually. It's very helpful and useful, but it is the lowest rung of reality. It's the end of this stream of reality because it's simply describing in words what already is and saying water is H2O, but you don't drink H2O, you drink water. Water has meaning and higher truth. H2O does not. And so H2O can't give you hope, for example, because again, it's not the soup. You need the soup. That's what gives you life because that's what's real. H2O, it's nice to know that there's H2O in your glass, but it's not going to keep you from, dehydrating and dying, for example, when you're in the desert.
Right.
And so all of these stories, Snow White's the big one. Go follow the symbolic meme and stuff on Instagram. She's doing great work. Symbolic World of Pajot too. They're breaking down. Pajot's got a book coming out, a graphic novel of Snow White, a retelling of it.
I think it's already out, isn't it?
Is it? Yeah, I think it is out. Yep, that's right. I'm thinking about St. Christopher, the dog-headed saint.
Yeah, right, that one.
But yeah, Snow White, mine is Robin Hood. That's a huge one for me that I always refer back to.
And Dan Van Voris, anyway.
Oh, is it? Yeah.
He loves
the cartoon. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Again, I always tell people this, like the artists that work at Disney Studios, I'm positive did not know what they were doing when they chose the animals based on their characteristics from myth, actually, right?
Yeah.
But they didn't know necessarily that all of those characteristics were drawn from the Bible. And so inadvertently, but on purpose, reality is impinging upon that movie. Same thing with The Jungle Book, right? Which they stole The Jungle Book and Robin Hood, and there's one other movie. They use the same cells because they would use the same
the same voice actors too,
and same voice actors.
Yeah,
but I mean, even like the Jungle Book, the Disney Jungle Book, like it's so obviously like the biblical symbolism, and it's just right there. And that's what we mean by reality will force you to conform to it, whether you want to or not. Which is why you can then watch it and go, Prince John is the devil, and Richard comes back and he's a lion. He's the king. He's obviously Jesus. And Aslan and Robin Hood is a fox. And now go back and read like the book of Proverbs, and the fox is in the vineyard. And Little John's a bear. And then you go back to read about the prophet and the bear running out of the woods and killing the children, and the rabbits and the pigs, and the badger is the priest. Like the symbolism of all that is saying to you, there's a greater reality that's actually coming through in these movies. This is why modern movies suck, because they're aware of the symbolism and they're trying to subvert it on purpose. And it heightens reality so that people reject it and go, no, I'm not watching this anymore.
It's not right.
It's not right. It's not good. It's not true. It's not beautiful.
Well, that's what I remarked after the Dune, walking out, is like the men were men and the women were women. And
Weren't they? Weren't they though?
Maximally. I mean, the women were, they definitely were in control, but not in a like, oh, I'm going to
like Jessica, right?
Yeah. I mean, Shawnee's kind of the exception,
right?
Because she's more violent, but
even in the end,
yeah, it's very feminine.
But in the end, Shawnee ends up on the outside. She's pushed to the margins because I like the fact that in the movie, like Gunny is like, I like you, you're good, you stay with me, right? And then it's when you realize she's on the wrong side of this, because Gunny's on the wrong side. He exists within the movie as a counter narrative to the kind of Messiah figure that they've erected.
And he's not going to last. He's the old.
Yeah,
the old,
you know that.
He's he's
the old guard. Exactly. He's the old world.
Right.
And you realize, oh, well, Chani's a part of that old world too, even though she's not from.
Well, that's what I said to Anne. I said, I don't know how many people know this, because I had the same response when I read the book. It's like, when did the Fremen learn to fly interstellar spaceships?
Correct, right? Mary Sue's.
They just walk on, and then they're just going to take off, and in all the Sardaukar ships. Like, what?
Yeah, Ray Palpatine is there. Well,
I know how they do it, but
how many generations were they there from landing on?
I don't remember, but yeah, it's a lot. You have to go read the.
But they would have completely forgotten how to fly by that point.
Yeah, I mean, Brian Herbert deals with that in some of the prequel books. Yeah. Like he does the intervening years stuff.
Okay. But, but no, it again is, as much as you want to deny reality, deny the hierarchy and all these other things, they just cannot. They're like the sandworms. You can't deny them. They will. And
if you're forced against it, people will reject it. They won't.
You will break it. You will break.
Yeah, they'll respond with their dollars.
Exactly.
Right.
Nature finds a way.
So that's an interesting prequel.
That was fantastic. We shouldn't even record anything now.
Oh,
so everybody on the live cast, that was entirely for you. And then for those of you listening to the end of the episode on the audio version, if you can, come and watch the live stream.
I mean, that's all that's expected of us, an hour-long show. I think we just did it.
I think. How long? Yeah, how long was that?
We fulfilled our contract. So
that's right, exactly. I'm union.
I don't know. I didn't push record. I have no idea. I mean, it's recording somewhere in the ether.
On YouTube.
Yeah, right.
That's what I'm saying. The audio from this. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll pull it. Okay. All right. I'm going to push record.
I am too.
Finally.
There we go.
There. Dots. And War Chants is the thing that we do next.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. This is the Banned Books Podcast, episode number 344. And as always, we are your hosts, Christopher Gillespie.
Chillin' Willin', Maxin' and Relaxin'. In the morning.
And I am Donovan Riley.
Yeah, still morning.
Yep, still morning. We just got off at, almost an hour prequel to the podcast on the live stream?
Pre-show, yep.
Pre-show, prequel. So if you want to join us for the live stream on Fridays when we go live, you can go on Telegram, Facebook, Twitter X.
The links are below, and if you're just looking on the show notes, or if you're to all the streaming platforms. So
there you go.
Usually the top three are YouTube, number one. Number two is now X. Number three is Rumble. You get the Rumble too.
There we go, Rumble.
So we'll just be censorship proof. That's what we're looking for, because YouTube, you never know. I mean, they may just pull the plug on us at any day, as they do.
Right.
Yeah,
that's true. That's true. So everything that actually is worth listening to will be at the end of this podcast on the audio that we ripped from the live stream and put on there. That was
everything worth listening to.
Everything worth listening to is at the end. So just fast forward to the last hour and then come back to the beginning. But no, we were talking about symbolism and culture and chimeras and succubi and all kinds of fun stuff with our live streamers. So that being said,
catechesis again.
That's true. We were 100%. So on the show then, speaking of catechesis, we're going to dive into Ambrose, the sainted Ambrose, teacher of Augustine, on what is the official, on the what?
The sacraments. De Sacramentus, I think is what it's called.
Or on the mysteries.
Or something in Latin. On the mysteries.
On the mysteries. There we go.
Yeah.
Chapter 8 his name, on the mysteries.
He's Aurelius Ambrosius, actually.
There we go. Aurelius Ambrosius.
You don't want to do a bio first? People don't know who Ambrose is.
Please do.
All right. 339 to 397. He was Bishop of Milan from 374 to 397 till his death. Very prominent public figure. Milan, I don't know. For whatever reason. Maybe banking? Who knows why it was such a prominent place, but known for his response against Arianism and paganism. So this is important for us in our conversation today. And then we know him as the catechist for Augustine. So widely considered one of the four doctors of the Western Church, or of the Church generally. Actually, I think Eastern too recognize him as one of the doctors. So who are the other three? Let's see, the doctors of the Church. Probably, it depends on what era you're looking at. Latin Church, Western Church. Gregory the Great, Ambrose, Augustine of Hippo, and Jerome. Okay, fair enough. Yeah. And then the three doctors of the Byzantine Church are Chrysostom, Basil the Great, and Gregory of Nazianzus. So, there you go.
There we go. Very nice.
There's lots of doctors. We have lots of doctors.
Lots of doctors. Doctor. Go watch Airplane. Yeah, I don't know. As I've gotten older, I've become more preferential towards the Eastern fathers than the Western fathers, especially Jerome.
Yeah.
I've come to appreciate Ambrose far more than Augustine.
Right. Well, and I think that's why we want to look at it, because he's not as different from those Eastern fathers that I mentioned, like Cyril, or Gregory, or Basil, as Augustine is. Augustine, it must be the Platonism. He just can't get away from it.
Right. Yeah.
And then the East had moved on. It's clear they're not.
This
they're
is
not
true.
Platonic.
This is true.
Yeah. So
okay. We talk about it a lot because I do believe it is fundamentally one of the most important aspects of church that you have to pay attention to if you're going to study theology at any level, which is the degree to which Neoplatonism affected that theologian or that church movement. Because modern Protestantism is so affected by Neoplatonism in, for example, the rejection of the sacraments and the spinning out in different church movements or bodies about the doctrine of free will, for example, and to what degree, greater or lesser, they teach that the human has to participate with God's grace in some way, shape, or form in their salvation. And I think this is my primary, I was thinking about this in the shower the other day, because I really, as has been made blatantly obvious on this show the last couple of months, I really have a big problem with modern Protestants. And the deeper I go into this, ironically, through C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien and Chesterton, these three in particular, have really been my teachers in pointing out, because they're responding to modernity like right there. Like they're all coming out of the First World War and saying, all right, we grew up in this kind of halcyon moment of optimism. Then we were all shipped off to the front. We all in some way, shape, or form were affected by the war. We're coming back and we're saying, this modernity thing, I don't think it's actually going to play out the way that we were told. Right. And they're warning everybody in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, in the early 70s They're warning people for decades, this is not going to go well. And no one listened to them. They're like, go write your cute little stories. And they're like, you don't understand. Like, there's a reason we're writing our cute little stories. And it's actually to fight this shadow. And of course, modern scholars have tried to read into Tolkien, for example. This is all just PTS from the war. And he's just writing in his war experiences into the stories, which of course is inevitable. It's his life experience, but he was aware of that. He acknowledges this in his letters quite often. He's like, yeah, I'm aware of that, but it wasn't a subtext of because again, these are universal truths that I'm writing about. And
right.
The influence of Neoplatonism, they saw it even affecting the church in Britain, for example, and saying, like Chesterton in particular, obviously, who is such a wonderful cultural observer and critic, and the things he wrote for the newspapers, for example, he's constantly calling out progressivism. He's calling out Marxism. He's calling out innovation, technology for the sake of technology, and the promises of technology that are going to make our lives better. He's doing that already in the 30s. And it is, again, this pursuit of the purely spiritual at the expense of the material, or the material at the expense of the spiritual, and ripping the two in half and saying, you can have one or the other, but you can't have both. And
to some background knowledge maybe that will help then is that Ambrose is from Gaul, which was Roman, right? Near Trier, I think.
The edge.
Yeah, so highly pagan in that area. And then, but his interaction in Milan, his primary opponent to be bishop, interesting, was a Cappadocian.
Yes.
So I mean, we forget this about the Roman Empire, but they're highly mobile. I mean, maybe not as much as today, but a lot more than what we think. I mean, Cappadocians what are they doing in Milan? But there you are. I mean, the churches, people are moving around, and this is how they can have church councils. Of course, it takes a while to get there and back, but they still do. They move, and so they cross pollinate, and so you can be engaged against Arianism and Platonism, but you can also be engaging in the writings of the Cappadocian fathers at the same time.
Yeah. Well, think about how far apart, just like geographically, but like theologically and culturally, Cappadocia is from Gaul.
Yeah. Or from Milan, right? I mean, it's like a triangle. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like you might as well be coming from different planets at that point. And yet, like you said, it's all connected somehow by roads and by people migrating here, there, and the other, and everywhere. But to me, then, what Augustine does, and I spent so much time with him in my postgraduate work.
We all do, since we have Luther as an Augustinian. Can't help it.
Coming out of this expatriated Roman culture in North Africa that he grew up in, and being literally right across the water from Rome for so much of his life, and being like, he's Roman. He's North African, but he's Roman. And you see this in not only the fact that he can't read Hebrew or Greek, but that he's so reliant on the Roman worldview, which is then, he was a scholar of Cicero, for example, and so was Julian of Eclanum, and the two had a debate over free will, and they were both Cicero scholars, and it comes in a lot, actually, in that debate. And you realize Augustine's worldview is Neoplatonic, and his opponents force him to look at that. The Pelagians do, in particular, those famous debates where they use Augustine's own works against him to prove he's a heretic against himself. It's like Karlstadt saying that Luther is too Catholic. He's like, Karlstadt's more Luther than Luther was. I always like that quote. It's like, I'm more Lutheran than you are. It's like, but my name is Luther. He's like, you used to be Luther, but I'm the new Luther now. And yeah, I think, as our beloved Dr. Norman Nagel said, and we've said on the show, all of the great sins of the Western Church can be blamed on Augustine, but so can all the great successes.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with Augustine.
Doctrinally,
Yeah, he's not one or the other. He's a lot. And the beauty of Ambrose is that, like you said, he is much more sympathetic to the Eastern Fathers, exegetically especially, where you can see they're drinking from the same well still. Yeah. And when you get to Jerome and Augustine, though, there's stuff there that philosophically you really have to take into consideration and be careful of.
I think so. So one more thing with Ambrose. For us, very significant. First Sunday in Advent, the hymn of the day is
Yes.
Veni Creator, right? Genitum, right?
Yep.
Or is that right? Savior of the nations? Is that the first Sunday in Latin? In Advent? Yeah. Savior of the nations comes.
Savior of the nations come.
Yeah. So I'm thinking Veni Creator is a different hymn from him. That's, how do we sing it now? Come Holy Spirit, right? No, that's a
God
different one.
Lord, yeah.
We sing that one too. Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Martin Luther translated that.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have a few Ambrosian hymns that are part of our regular tradition.
Still around. So there you go.
So that's how most people in our churches are going to engage with Ambrose,
right?
Through those hymns.
I was talking with Adam. I think that in the old days it was as you pray, so you believe. Lex orandi, lex credendi, lex vivendi. Actually, is the conclusion. I actually think nowadays it's what you sing. I think that's a more accurate depiction. Is what you sing in church is what you believe. It's a reflection of what you believe.
If you sing, even.
Well, there you you
Yeah.
If you even believe. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
So this is chapter 8 then of On the Mysteries. Since we're on this trajectory throughout Lent, of the mystical feast of the altar of the Lord. Well, there we go. We talked about this in the pre-show. You need an altar, you need a sacrifice, you need blood. These are the fundamental aspects of the rite. And this goes back to, well, the killing of animals and the shedding of blood to make skins to cover.
Right, it's clothes of skin.
Yes. And so this mystical feast, the word mystery, right? Do you want to look up real quick for our listeners who aren't aware of what mysterium means? What we mean? Because, again, we've talked about it numerous times.
Theologically or...
well, both.
Or just
the theological and just in general, the grammatical.
Okay.
Is that Paul calls them mysteries. He doesn't call them sacraments. This is an Augustine innovation that we've talked about before. Not a helpful one, according to Luther or myself. I love the term mystery. It's, I think, a much better term.
Well, I like that. I'm gonna look at this word mystic, which is even more interesting.
Religious truth, 14th century from mystere.
Yeah. I mean, it just means what it means, unfortunately. But a mystic is an initiated person whose eyes are opened.
Interesting, because it actually means hidden truth, right?
Right. They see what's hidden. That's what a mystic is someone who sees what's hidden.
Yeah.
Or what was hidden.
This is why Dr. Luther will say, if you want to understand the sacraments, for example, pluck your eyes out and put them in your ears and listen. And then you will see them.
Rod Rosenblatt said, your earballs. Your
earballs, exactly.
The kids
this is what we mean. The mysteries, that is, it's a hidden truth. It's a symbol.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is one of those cases, I think, with a church word. I mean, it predates the church, but it comes into the church and it just means, it's like baptism, right? It means to wash with water, but it means to be washed with water. That's Christ's blood and give the Holy Spirit and all of that, right? Yeah. And like, you don't use that word in any other context anymore, except for it to refer to Christian baptism.
Right. So a mystical feast then is literally an eating with a hidden truth, a hidden meaning. And it takes place on the altar or table. The table is the altar, the altar is the table, the hearth of the Lord himself, which is why Seth is the first person in the Bible that is recorded to have built an altar and preached the word of the Lord.
Correct.
And so, again, these are prehistoric, so to speak, primordial. This is primordial truth. This must happen this way. And again, not only in the godly sense, but in the inversion of the godly, in the demonic.
Yep.
There has to be an altar or a table. There has to be a sacrifice of blood. There has to be a feast. There has to be
a God that's being referenced, right?
A God that's being revered. This is what happens at Sinai, for example, right? Is that when Moses comes back with the tablets and God ratifies the marriage contract and introduces himself to them as their Lord, there is a celebration, there is a feast. Now, they were celebrating and feasting before Moses came down the mountain, but they were celebrating and feasting a different marriage contract being ratified. Thus, the golden calf.
Right. Yeah, with the other gods, the gods of Egypt.
Was it Rehoboam who built 2 golden calves? Was it Rehoboam? Solomon's.
I can't remember.
Wasn't
that sounds
it Rehoboam?
right. I think so.
Yeah.
That sounds right.
I just preached on this on Wednesday, so I should remember. But yeah, like, 1, really? Okay, well, watch this.
Well, you got to franchise it out, right? I mean,
yeah, I'm just saying. You have Judah and Israel. We can't just have one. So just from the outset, the very first sentence of chapter 8, the mystical feast of the altar of
This
the
is
Lord
actually the
loaded.
editor's. This is the editor's note, but
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
His text starts in the next paragraph.
Yeah. But it's loaded with meaning then, because it does establish a beachhead for what's about to be discussed. Lest any should think lightly of it. Exactly. St. Ambrose shows that it is of a higher antiquity than the sacred rites of the Jews, meaning it predates Israel, which Paul points out in Galatians, since it was foreshadowed in the sacrifice of Melchizedek, and far better than the manna, because it's the body of Christ. So, the cleansed people, rich with these adornments, hastens to the altar of Christ, saying, I will go to the altar of God, to God who makes glad my youth. There you go. So number one, again, clothing. What is our clothing?
This is baptism.
Yes.
That's
we are cleansed.
He's already
There's
preached
your tip
on
off.
that.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, he preached before leading up to this. So we've been cleansed, we've been purified, naked, by the way. Remember, in the days of Ambrose, baptism was, you were nude.
Sure.
But you're clothed. In your nudity, you are clothed with Christ. Because like we talked about in the last episode, skins is one of the most prevalent symbolic meanings throughout the entirety of the Bible. Skin and clothing, covering. It's massively important. All the way up through the death and resurrection of Jesus. And obviously then through baptism. And the early church understood this.
And his
so
baptismal rite, rite is, we talked about this last week a little bit, is a little bit more expansive than ours. So I'll just summarize it really quickly. There's the epitha, be opened. Then you go into the baptistry. Then you're anointed. Then you renounce the devil and all his works and his ways. Then you're exorcised, right? Not exorcised, exorcised.
Yeah.
The water has to be blessed. Then you descend into the font. You have full immersion, right? And in the font you profess again, and the name is put on you. You come out of the pool. Then you're anointed again. Then your feet is washed by the newly baptized.
Nice.
Then you're vested with the right robe, and then you're sealed again with oil, and then you go to the altar for the sacrament. Right, immediately. Right. So, I mean, it's a pretty. It's all biblical. I mean, it's not like he's making things up.
It's symbol heavy. Yeah.
It's symbol heavy. That's correct. And you imagine.
But also, they've been made to wait 4 years.
I think Ambrose is a little shorter than that because the enrollment. I think the enrollment is just Lent.
Okay.
For catechesis, but it's daily catechesis through Lent, so it's 40 days.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's 40 days.
Oh, that's much better. I like that much.
We could do it that way.
Do that for confirmation. Ooh.
Yeah, just a 40-day catechesis daily.
I like that. Require them to come to
that's
church
intense.
every Sunday, but then
that's intense. You
40
imagine
days of catechesis every day. The parents would never go for it.
I don't know.
No,
it's not. Instead of every week for 3 years or 4 years.
Yeah.
I don't know.
40 days every day. Very interesting. I kind of like that.
Okay. All right. So
note to self.
Of a new note to self.
We'll call it efficiency, but it does go to the point again that what they're doing and symbolically what they're revealing is that this is no small thing. This is a rite, yes, but
bringing the psalm to bear, right? I go to the altar of God.
Right. Yeah, I will go to the altar of God to God who makes glad my youth.
But that's one of the Psalms of Ascent. Which one is that? 118, maybe? Do you remember? I don't remember which one. So it would be prayed at the Passover. Psalm 43, actually. It's not a Psalm of Ascent.
Go.
Psalm 43. All right.
But this goes to what we were actually talking about in the pre-show again, which is we don't live in a world of symbol and meaning anymore. It's there. It exists because it is reality. It's expressing reality, and it's objectively there. But we're not taught to recognize symbol. We're not taught meaning, the hidden meaning behind things anymore. And this has been going on for generations and generations now, like 250, 300 years. And as a consequence, when you read about what you described, regarding the baptismal rite, that's the world they live in. And that's the expectation then of the rite, is that it will be literally overflowing with symbol. Right. Because that's the world they live in, and that's their cosmology. This is their model, like Lewis talks about in The Discarded Image. Like they had a model that they used to comprehend reality and everything. And everything was done everything in its place, and every place has a thing. It's the hand-in-hand thing. So like when they would do history, for example, all of history is universal because all of history coalesces into one tapestry. It's a weave. Right. And if there's a loose thread, you got to figure out where that thread fits inside this pre-existing tapestry. You're not making the tapestry. You're literally just figuring out what each thread in the weave is doing there, what color it adds and what texture and so on. And you're a part of that weave. And this is how you're being you're being told, like, this is where you fit within the weave of salvation, for example, this tapestry of salvation. Mm-hmm. You're right here. You're this thread. And they were like, okay, good, I get this. Whereas we don't have that anymore. So for me or you to say, we're going to bring this back and we're going to do this, we could do it and people would go along with it because it does have meaning.
Right.
But it would always be janky. Like we were talking about trying to repristinate the past. Mm-hmm. It would be janky to people because they don't understand symbol and they don't understand meaning. And how many Sundays in a row would you have to do this before everybody in the church was at least informed about why you were doing these things?
Well, right? I mean, I would push back a little bit because, I mean, this is at the vigil. This is on Holy Saturday evening, leading into Easter. And I've always had the Easter vigil through my practice. The one that LSB gives us, more or less, is pretty faithful to historic practice. It doesn't really matter. But it's one-off. It's a one-off service, and people come expecting it to be a one-off service. Like, this is not a typical Sunday service. And so, I mean, they seem to be pretty receptive to the ritual, because it's thick with meaning. A lot of that being brought forward into our.
But how many of these rites do you bring into it, though? How many of these symbols do you include?
Yeah. Well, we don't usually delay baptism to that either.
Right.
Right. So that.
But that's my point too. Is that because we don't recognize these things, we put off baptism until it's convenient. And then the symbols of baptism are like the candle or the shell or the white gown, but that's pretty much the totality of it.
Yeah, and the candle. Yeah, you said the candle. I don't. My question is, Ambrose's world is highly symbolic. Yes. So they create all these symbols in rejection of, or as a correction for the pagan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. And you said we're not as symbolic. I mean, I don't know if that's actually true. It's just our symbols.
Well, I just mean in the sense of, like, we don't recognize them anymore as symbols. We just drive right by them and go, well, that's just a thing.
Right. And so, I mean, we do have rituals, but they're fairly ossified. Okay. And
well, that's what I mean, right? Is that, there are symbols everywhere, and there is meaning because meaning is objective, but we drive by them because we're not taught to recognize the symbols.
So it would be harder for us, and we have local practice in our congregation, so there is some malleability to recognize, like, we're going to do this rite to reject this rite that's happening in the world around us.
Exactly. Yes.
You know, and I think part of that is Sunday morning now, actually, is that we're going to set aside, you know, and it's going to be more than an hour. It's going to be longer than a typical TV show, right? And
right.
You know, and so there's going to be an intensity to that, and you know, and that it's countercultural. You know, that's the word that we usually use, but it's counter-ritual, actually, or it's counter-symbolic as well. It's like, we're going to gather together. We're not going to gather in our homes watching on TV, right? We're going to gather in person.
Right.
That's a counter-ritual.
Right. But you also see then that because we're not taught and we don't consider cultural rites and the symbols and the meaning of them, when the pastor, for example, gets up in the pulpit and then starts to point out these things and says, well, the trans movement is literally chimeric, and this is the popularization and normalization of monsters. People go, what the hell are you talking about?
Right.
Can't you see that? It's so obvious. Like, there's monsters in the public square. And
lay this out for me, Pastor. I need a 3-step with some details, right?
Yes.
Get me there.
Right.
Maybe, or maybe they just kind of they just water off the back. And
don't we just have to love everyone the way
they
they are? Don't we have to pray for them? It's like, yes, we have to pray for them, but I don't think you understand what you're praying for. That's kind of the part of the problem.
What love is, even at that
or
point.
What love is. Do you love monsters? I mean, this is the importance of reading myths.
My son loves dinosaurs.
Dragons.
We're going to go dig up some dragons. It's going to be fun.
There we go. Good. You should. My daughter asked me last night where all the dragons went, and I said, we killed all of them. And she said, how? And I said, well, how does someone kill anything?
You can go to Wyoming and dig them up. That's what we're going to do.
You can. That's right.
Find some bones.
So they're cleansed. They put on the clothing of Christ, which is not the clothing that you and I are wearing right now, or anyone who's listening to this is wearing, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you are clothed in Christ, then you hasten to the altar of Christ and you say, I'm going to the altar because God makes glad my youth. I've laid aside the slough of ancient error. Now, is that slough or slew?
Oh, that's a good question.
English is the worst.
Look up speech. Start speaking. All right. My speaker's slough. I like slough house.
Slough house.
Okay.
It's not slough, honey. I don't. This is an Anglo-Saxon.
Oh, no, that's a town in eastern England. No, that's not it.
No,
swamp.
Maybe
to
it's
slough
gotta be
off,
slough,
right? To shed.
Slough
yeah.
off. Yeah, to shed.
Yeah, slough.
Right.
To shed
So
or
lay
remove a layer of dead
aside
skin.
the ancient errors. So just slough off the ancient errors. Renewed with an eagle's youth, it hastens to approach the heavenly feast. It comes, and seeing the holy altar arranged, cries out, You have prepared a table in my sight. David introduces the people as speaking, where he says, The Lord feeds me, and nothing shall be wanting to me. In a place of good pasture has he placed me. He has led me forth by the water of refreshment. And later, For though I walk in the midst of the shadow of death, I will fear no evils, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff have comforted me. You have prepared in my sight a table against them that trouble me. You have anointed my head with oil, and your inebriating cup, how excellent it is.
Love it. Oh, that's great.
That's a better translation. That's such a better translation.
It overflows into my mouth.
Yes.
That's awesome.
I like that.
Oh,
That's
man.
great.
Yeah. Yeah. So Psalm 23, obviously, is clear to people. They recognize that right away. Right.
It should be. It was clear to Ambrose. It's clear to you and me. I hope it's clear.
Yeah. Well, it's I mean, that one's still present in popular idiom, right?
But we can jump off on this point then to go back to Neoplatonism, which is, if you don't actually think this is about a physical eating and drinking that David's describing, that he's talking about a spiritual eating and drinking, yeah, that's Neoplatonism. You're taking and separating out the spiritual from the material.
Oh, it's like a
saying,
metaphorical
you
eating and
understand.
drinking. Oh.
Yes, there it is. It represents
metaphorical
an
dark
actual
valley of death and a metaphorical green pasture and still water.
Right. Even though we know that David wrote this psalm in an actual cave, in an actual valley, where he was surrounded by people who were ordered to kill him.
Correct.
We know this is a historical truth. Even if it is historically true for David, it's spiritually true for us.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Jesus physically
is,
fulfills it, the feeding of the 5,000 as well. Like
he does there too.
Actually gathers people onto green pastures.
Right,
and feeds
and
them.
has them sit down and feeds them, yes.
Right.
Next to a body of water, yes.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
And so this is the point, though, is that if you're anti-sacramental, if you're anti-mystery, what you'll do with the mystery is that the mystery is a hidden truth that can only be grasped spiritually speaking. That is, in modern terms, psychologically, conceptually, in my heart or in my imagination. I don't need bread or wine or goldfish crackers and Kool-Aid. I just need to imbibe this word from God spiritually, intellectually. And once it's in me, I have the benefits. And right. You who want to go up and kneel and eat this wafer and drink out of this cup, this is just an empty Catholic ritual. That's all it is. It's just a ritual that just represents, it's a metaphor. It's like, I don't think you understand what the word ritual means, first of all.
Well, you made the, unfortunately, our friends, the Baptist move, where it's like, well, there's different kinds of baptism. There's spirit baptism and water baptism. And you're like,
right.
I mean, you're violating
That's also a Neoplatonic move too, yeah.
It's the basic grammar of the word, never mind.
Yes.
You're using Platonic categories to describe the accident and the substance and all that kind of thing, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And this is the danger then, is that I was talking with a friend about this the other day of, what's the object of your faith? Christ. Okay.
Yeah.
Where is that object that I can reach out and get a hold of him then?
Mm-hmm.
You just described it in physical terms. There's an object somewhere. It's a physical object. Where's the material? Where's the raw material that I can grab him?
Based on my own experience, I mean, sometimes I have to stumble into hearing things that are blatantly not Lutheran or not, well, really just not scriptural. And, it's always Jesus out there. So, and then it's if then, right? So you just have to go out and get him. But they never tell you how to get them. He's just out there, and you have to go get him and seek him. But he doesn't tell you. They don't even tell you where to find him. So it's like, well, what? My whole life is going to be seeking and never finding.
Yes.
How about Jesus seeking you and finding you? Let's reverse the direction of things.
Right.
We don't have to go find him. He finds us, right?
Right.
Which is what he does here. The Lord feeds me, and nothing shall be wanting to me.
Right.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
So we must now pay attention then, lest perchance anyone seeing that what is visible, there we go, for things which are invisible cannot be seen nor comprehended by human eyes. I like how he includes that in parentheses, just in case you didn't know. Just in case anyone that can't see this, we would say, God rained down manna and rained down quails upon the Jews. Exodus 16, verse 13. But for the church, beloved of him, the things which he has prepared are those of which it is said, quote, that eye has not seen, nor ear heard, neither has it entered into the heart of man, what things God has prepared for them that love him. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 9. So, he says, lest anyone should say this, we will take great pains to prove that the sacraments of the church are both more ancient than those of the synagogue and more excellent than the manna.
Wow. This is really helpful, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that, because we do this with marriage, Paul does, I should say,
in
Ephesians, right? It was like, no, the marriage of Christ and his church is the more ancient, and it predates even Adam and Eve.
Right, exactly.
Not only was Christ crucified from the foundation of the world, but actually the marriage of Christ to his people, the church, that was already in the mind of God before he even made Adam and Eve.
Right.
And he made them for the purpose to teach us of that eternal relationship of not only the relationship of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, but also God's relation to his people, right? And
so
then they forfeited that immediately.
Genesis, then, he comes looking for Adam and Eve and says, where are you? But then he sends the patriarchs out into the wilderness to find their brides. Every single one is sent out into the wilderness to find their bride, just as he goes out into the wilderness to find his bride, not only in the Old Testament, but in the New Testament, obviously, with the Canaanite woman and the Samaritan woman and Mary Magdalene and others.
Well, it's like Abraham sending the servant back to find a bride for Isaac, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, they're constantly being sent out into the wilderness as Jesus goes out into the wilderness to find his bride. He is the wilding God, yes.
Wow. Nice. Always gathering the church or the bride, as we say.
Yes. As we said in the
again, the point,
the
point is that's more ancient. That's the point he's making here about even the bread of the sacrament. The manna comes after the after Christ gives his body.
Yeah.
That's a hard.
The manna comes after the Lord's Supper. Yeah.
It doesn't. Yeah. And the Passover too. Then.
Yeah.
The Passover was given to teach us about the sacrament, which is more ancient.
Which is given to teach us about the Lamb who was crucified from the creation of the world. Yeah.
Yeah. And John saw it by the Spirit, of course.
Jesus was already bled out before the Passover happened.
And so then all history is given to lead us to
back
the eternal
to the
reality.
To zero.
Back to zero. Huh.
Yeah.
Oof. That's helpful.
Yeah, that's what it means when he says, I am the Alpha and the Omega now. Now, all of a sudden, the broader reality comes crashing in. Oh, you mean the beginning, and the end is the beginning is the end. So what's everything in between? Just me reinstating that for you. Just like, you can't escape it.
It's like the rollback. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. It's like you can run as far as you want into the future. You're going to meet me. You can try and go backwards like we were talking about in the pre-show. Run as far back into your past as you can go. You'll still find me there.
Always at work, always gathering his people.
So maybe, again, go listen to the pre-show at the end of this episode that we were talking about before we hit record. But when you talk about nostalgia then and thinking back wistfully to when you were in your early 20s, your teens or whatever, instead of sitting there and thinking nostalgically, I really wish I could get back to that time of naivety and freedom and lack of responsibility and all these things. Ask yourself instead, what was Christ actually trying to show you in those times when you were operating at 1,000 miles an hour, like popcorn coming out of a popcorn popper with the top off, where you were just running and everything was new and everything was exciting. I was talking to Gillespie about this, that I was watching this list on YouTube of the best albums month to month in the 90s. And from about 90 to 98, I can tell you where I was at when I heard that album for the first time. And it's so pristine and clear to me that there were certain songs from certain albums. I can remember almost the smell of that moment, because I can tell you the car that I was in and who I was with in that car. And I can even tell you the street we were on and where we were going. Almost what we were talking about, even that song came on. And it's so powerful that it literally threatens to throw me into a depression, because I get so depressed that I miss that so much.
Yeah.
Versus, okay, but what's the greater meaning here? The purpose of nostalgia is not to get lost in your own thoughts, and they're colored by, the present. The point of the present is to say, where was the alpha in that original story that you're telling about yourself?
Right.
And then when you think about the future, do the exact same thing. Where's that omega out there in that future that you're thinking about, either with fear or with hope? Because he is out there, right?
Or
Tolkien calls it the eucatastrophe.
This is the thing. You go down into the Sheol, he's there. You go to the heights of the mountains, he's there.
He's there,
And you can do the same thing with time.
And so maybe for those of you who struggle with depression or anxiety in particular, whether it whatever it is that brings that on, rather than just retread those paths, which again, these are temptations to sin. This is why the early fathers talked about demons and spirits whispering in our ears to plant those seeds in our ears to lead us down paths where Jesus doesn't want us to go. And so it's not just your psychology or your brain chemistry that's doing this to you.
Right.
There are spirits and there are powers of darkness at play, and they are whispering to you, attempting to tear you away from Christ. So rather than listen to them, you acknowledge that they're liars. You acknowledge that they're there to tempt you and test you, and then ask, okay, but what is Jesus? Like, what is Jesus teaching me now?
Right.
Because these demons, these spirits have no power over me because I'm in Christ. So I don't have to fear them. But I also don't have to choose now to follow this path that they want to lead me down into darkness. I can go the other direction, right? It's like, again, in The Hobbit, Riddles in the Dark, when Bilbo's there with Gollum in that underground lake in this cave, and they're having, if he loses, he gets eaten. That's how this works. And yet it is in the midst of that, then that eucatastrophe happens of he gets the ring, he's led out, because again, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there it is. He sees this opening, right?
It's provided to him.
And so if Jesus is the beginning and the end of everything, then everything in between is just pointing you back to, you're coming from him, but you're going toward him too. So what are you afraid of?
And the way that he left, he will return as well. So you have the other.
Right, exactly. Yeah. The same door he left out of, he's going to come back to that same door.
Which is the same door. Returning on the clouds. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so you're always being led back to the mountain, up the mountain, to the top of the mountain, through the clouds, to the peak. So the lesson of Genesis, there it is, paragraph 45. Mm-hmm. The lesson of Genesis just read shows that they are most ancient. For the synagogue took its origin from the law of Moses. But Abraham was far earlier, who after conquering the enemy and recovering his own nephew as he was enjoying his victory was met by Melchizedek, who brought forth those things which Abraham reverently received, bread and wine. Mm-hmm. Because after the celebration, there is a feast. It was not Abraham who brought them forth, but Melchizedek, who is introduced without father, without mother, having neither beginning of days nor ending, but like the Son of God, of whom Paul says to the Hebrews, he remains a priest forever, who in the Latin version is called King of Righteousness and King of Peace. So last night, I was listening to just this really short clip from Stephen DeYoung, Father Stephen DeYoung, talking about Isaiah and the Alma, right? Alma meaning young woman who hasn't had a child yet, a virgin.
Right.
And he points out that Isaiah is pointing at an actual young woman in the court of the king.
Correct.
He's pointing at her and going, this virgin's going to have a baby. And this baby is for the upheaval of this kingdom, all this other stuff, right? And then it actually happens.
Correct.
That's a historical truth.
Right.
Then Matthew reads that text and says, oh, the higher truth, though, is this is actually about Jesus. This is about Mary, the mother of God. Now, that means in the moment, Isaiah is inspired by God to say, this woman over here, this virgin's going to have a baby. And the baby that's born of this woman, all these things are going to happen as a consequence. Mm-hmm. Then you jump forward hundreds of years. The same Spirit of God then says to Matthew, that's Mary now. Now, did Isaiah know about Mary? No, he didn't need to. But were the words that Isaiah spoke about Mary? Yes, they were.
Right.
But he didn't need to know that. God knows that. So then Matthew reads the prophecy of Isaiah and goes, "Oh, yeah, in the historical, it's her. In the heavenly, it's this other mother." Right? And this is the same thing with Melchizedek. He's a real person. He's a real king. And he really does bring out bread and wine to celebrate the victory of Abraham over these armies.
Although, I mean, he's the perfect character for preaching on the sacrament because he's so mysterious.
That's the point, though. And so later writers, later authors are looking back at that story and saying, well, that's Jesus.
Well, because Jesus is called our righteousness, right? And he's our peace.
Exactly.
And that's his name. He's from Salem. Yes. He's the King of righteousness.
So you can do both. And I bring this back again, the material versus the spiritual. And we're saying, no, they function simultaneously. They're united. They're not to be separated. So you can't say that Melchizedek was real, and then we have this later spiritual interpretation of Jesus because we're just hijacking Old Testament text, right? Which in the early church, that's what they're grappling with. They're asking the question, what does the Old Testament have to do with we who are Gentiles? We're part of this New Testament, right? We're part of the church. And they wrestled with that. But I think the good exegetes recognize, no. The entire New Testament is simply the writings of men who said, actually, everything that was prophesied in the Old Testament about Christ came true. Correct. And they weren't negating the historical accuracy or the historical truth of these stories. They're simply saying there's 2, 3, 4 levels to these stories, like we talked about with the quadriga. There's like multiple levels of meaning in every one of these biblical stories. And God can talk in the moment and say, this is for you, Christopher. But then he's also talking to somebody who's going to live 500 years from now. Because God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, ages unto ages. He knows that. But in the moment, you don't know that.
Right.
But it doesn't matter that you don't know it.
And it's probably worth just mentioning. I mean, maybe it's well known to our listeners, but this process, I feel like, or this just approach to the scriptures. I mean, Jesus himself demonstrates that this is how you read the Bible, right?
Right.
Namely,
before Abraham was, I am, and
Right. Well, no, but especially Road to Emmaus was the one I had in mind.
Yeah.
Because because Luke says, beginning with Moses and the prophets, he revealed to them that all scriptures testify of me is effectively what he's doing. He makes that assertion and then he does it, right? And then when you read, I don't know, the very first sermon from Peter in Acts at Pentecost, right? And he's like, by the way, Joel chapter 2, and you're like, what? Day of thick darkness and the moon turned to blood, and you're like, I don't remember the evangelist saying that the moon turned to blood. And you're like, but it did, and Peter tells you it did, and that was fulfilled. And I like what you were saying about this. I was making this point because I had some new catechumens, and I start with the word. Like, what is the word of God? Like, why is that all we talk about here? Is what Jesus says, right? And what the scriptures give. And one of the points that I make is, like, we don't deny the historicity of any event, like you were saying with the young woman, the Alma.
Right.
That all these things actually happen, but they happen for our learning, right? They were inspired by God.
And to teach us a higher truth, yes.
Right. For instruction, for reproof, for correction, for training in righteousness, or instruction in righteousness.
I think the way that you avoid the Neoplatonic move of separating the spirit from the body is to say what John does in chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, was with God, and the Word is God. And everything that was made.
How do you think I taught the nature of God's Word? We read Genesis 1 and John 1.
Exactly. That's all you need to do.
It's so easy. Yeah. Then you're just like, so light
Jesus
and light
is everywhere.
And, darkness and darkness and Word.
He manifests himself physically all over the history of Israel. He's always there. He's with Abraham. Exactly. He's the one who says to Abraham, "You're going to have a baby."
Well, there is that problem where people say, well, how can he be both the burning bush and the angel of the Lord and the commander of the Lord's army and the three men that come and visit? I mean, how could he be all of those things?
Because you're too much of a materialist, that's why.
Right, exactly. Yeah. It's like, or the pillar of fire and pillar of cloud, right?
How can he be baptized in the Jordan River and the voice of God comes from heaven when the voice of God is being baptized in the river?
And the Spirit descends. It's his Spirit that comes from him.
And the Spirit descends. Yeah, exactly. And you're like, but I'll send you the Holy Spirit when I ascend. Like, how is that possible? Because you're reading it like a modern materialist would read it. You're looking at it like a scientist. You're trying to measure everything. And they, as you alluded to just now, they had no problem with these things whatsoever. It's like we talked about again in the pre-show. Like, they say things like, you get it. And everyone's like, yeah, of course we get it. And then we, as moderns, are like, I don't get it. It's like, yeah, because you have a completely different cosmology and worldview. You have a completely different, actually, understanding of God than we do.
So Jesus has the Spirit, he gives the Spirit, and the Spirit descends upon him.
Right. Yeah. He is the door. He knocks at the door. Yeah.
He leads you through the door. Right.
That's the mystery part, right? Basically just to say, I am reality. I am the Logos. Right. I'm it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So it is important because I think Ambrose, I get it. He's a 4th century Christian. He gets it. He's a part of this world. He's drowning in it. Who really gets it is Irenaeus against the heresies. And when he starts talking about Jesus and recapitulation, it's crazy.
I brought that. I meant to bring it up in Bible study on Sunday. Maybe it'll come up this week. That up until they discovered Nag Hammadi and all the Gnostic scrolls there, Irenaeus was it. That's everything we knew about Gnosticism we got from Irenaeus.
Yep. Read On the Incarnation by Irenaeus, especially during Lent. Oh, Holy Week.
Oh, yeah.
Irenaeus
We've done that
on the
before.
Incarnation for Holy Week is fantastic.
On the show? Didn't we?
Yeah.
Didn't we do it on the show?
Yeah, I've got
year?
2 copies of it. Yeah.
I
love Irenaeus. Again, lived in Gaul, defending the faith against the pagans.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I didn't even think of that. Okay.
We'll have to make a note and read that for Holy Week.
There you go.
So do you recognize who that is? He says, do you recognize who Melchizedek is? Can a man be king of righteousness when himself he can hardly be righteous? Can he be king of peace when he can hardly be peaceable? Well, he is a local warlord. It's in the title. He it is who is without mother according to his Godhead. For he was begotten of God the Father, of one substance with the Father, without a father according to his incarnation. For he was born of a virgin, having neither beginning nor end. For he is the beginning and end of all things, the first and last. There we go. Again, I just love when we anticipate things without, because it's just nice to be affirmed that you're not completely out of your mind.
Well, I've read this
people
before.
Far smarter and wiser than you go. No, you're okay. You're good.
I can't remember how long it's been, but and this is the reason why it resonates, or the reason why we anticipate it is he's thoroughly apostolic, right? I mean, he's making the same moves as reading the scripture the way the apostles read it.
Right. It's just affirming for us in the present tense to be like, you're apostolic too. And you're like, oh, man, thanks. That's such a relief.
Well, I don't know. I don't know that we really wrestle with what that means, one holy Christian and apostolic church. I mean, for some, it just means some kind of succession, right? That you hand over, but we're like, no, you hand over the faith as it's been given, it's received, right?
Yeah.
And what does that mean, the faith? You're talking about the confession of faith, but it's more than that. This is how we read the Bible. We read it like the apostles read it.
Right.
I think maybe that's a better definition. I don't know. Interesting.
No, it is helpful for sure. And so, can a man be a king of righteousness when he can hardly be righteous himself? Can he be king of peace when he's a warlord? He doesn't have a mother. Who is without mother according to the Godhead? Begotten of the Father, one substance, according to his incarnation, born of the Virgin, beginning and end.
So then
the sacrament.
Keep going.
The sacrament then, which you received, is the gift, not of man, but of God, brought forth by him who blessed Abraham, the father of faith, whose grace and deeds we admire. So we have proved the sacraments of the church to be the more ancient. Now recognize that they are superior. In very truth, it is a marvelous thing that God rained manna on the fathers and fed them with daily food from heaven, so that it is said, so man ate angels' food. Oh, that's a nice translation too. But yet, all those who ate that food died in the wilderness. But that food which you receive, that living bread which came down from heaven, furnishes the substance of eternal life. And whosoever shall eat of this bread shall never die. And it is the body of Christ. So what we do is, in the church, we talk about the earthly bread, as he notes, and the heavenly bread. And that, like Gregory of Nyssa says in his commentary on Exodus, the life of Moses, the bread that they ate in the wilderness was heavenly bread because it came down to them. It did not come up from the earth. So it was not made with human hands that milled out the grain, for example. And the quails that came in the evening, they came down from above, from the heavens, which is a part of their understanding that everything is a hierarchy. Not just reality has a hierarchy to it, but birds have a hierarchy, rocks have a hierarchy, precious minerals have a hierarchy, people have everything is a hierarchy within a hierarchy. It's fractal, as Pajot would say. It's like a kaleidoscope of hierarchies. And so every bird that comes down from heaven is actually superior in that sense to a bird that can't fly, like a penguin or an ostrich or something, right? And there's value actually assigned to these things. We don't even think about it. But what ends up happening then is that they recognize that a bird that's coming down from the heavens is sent by God down to them. So therefore it has heavenly meaning. Whereas a bird that is walking around on the ground, that's like a chicken, for example, it has a different kind of...
I prefer ostrich.
Or an ostrich. It has an earthly meaning, right? It has some... It obviously has a higher meaning. Everything does. But yet it is lower as far as its value for teaching us a heavenly meaning than something that is like an eagle or...
Well, that's where I was going to go.
Like
because you definitely have an emphasis on raven, angel, and eagle. Those are kind of like the three, I think, and then for different reasons, right? Some of it's color, right? You can't get away from white and black, light and dark. And then, what's the characteristic of the eagle is that it soars, right? It has the wingspan.
It nests on the tops of mountains.
Right.
The rock, the ROC, the giant eagles, the rocks that used to be around.
Oh,
like in New Zealand, the ones that would carry off people.
Oh no, I was thinking of Angry Birds.
No, in New Zealand, like the rocks, ROC. Again, they're still around. There's actual rocks that are large
giant eagles. Giant eagles.
But they used to be so large that even to this day there are still stories about going hunting. The New Zealand, like the Maori and so forth, would hunt for these birds because they would literally fly down and carry people away.
Oh,
that's how large they were. Yeah.
Enormous
like
legendary
eagle.
Bird of prey from the Middle East even. Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Huh.
Yeah. And even the harpy eagles that you see living in the dense jungles of South America, I believe. Like even those are the large by our standards, but they used to be 2, 3, 4 times larger.
Huh. So Marco Polo.
All the way up into the 19th century.
So 13th century, Marco Polo, quoted by Ambrose. It was for all the world like an eagle, but one indeed of enormous size, so big that its quills were 12 paces long and thick in proportion. And it was so strong that it will seize an elephant in its talons and carry him high into the air and drop him so he's smashed into pieces.
Which
was Marco Polo making it up, or...
No, but that's the point, though, is when he got back and they arrested him, and he told these stories, they're like, you're out of your mind. You're a maniac. Like, you're obviously lying.
All right. So this is also connected then to Way to the Phoenix, but to the Thunderbird.
Correct.
So the Thunderbird myth. That's North American. That's North American.
Yes. Yep. Same thing.
Indigenous, but it somehow made it to the Algonquins, right?
Yeah. Weird.
How did they?
And New Zealand and Asia and the Middle East. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, maybe they just existed. Oh, okay.
Weird. Yeah.
Oh,
so anyways.
They were dinosaurs too.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yep.
Flying dinosaurs.
Yeah. So strange. And but then again, that's why again in the previous text you're like a young eagle. Because you look up and you see these eagles flying up above the clouds into the mountains and they nest up there. Well, what's at the top of the mountain? God. And this is why, again, because I'm just living there every day now. This is why Tolkien has the rocks come and rescue the hobbits, the dwarves and Bilbo in one point in The Hobbit. But of course, at the end, when Sam and Frodo are going to die on Mount Doom, and then the birds come and seize them and bring them back to Arendelle, is where are they coming from? They're literally descending from the clouds in light. And they're attacking the Nazgul in the movie, and they rescue the hobbits. But
yeah, and I know that Tolkien was criticized because folks are like, well, why didn't you just have him come take them to Mount Doom in the first place?
Because they would have been killed along the way.
Right.
It's so obvious.
But there's also the extraordinary nature of them, right?
Well, of course. It's a eucatastrophe. It's a moment of joy that's
come in times of great need. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If you ask the question, number one, you're not understanding the beginning where it says Sauron was guarding all of the major pathways. All the major
not until he's defeated could the eagles land on Mount Doom. Yeah,
correct. And then number two, you don't understand Christian theology, and Tolkien does, which is, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil." Like, that's literally the entire third book of the trilogy.
That's true.
Is they're in the Valley of Death, and especially Sam and Frodo and Gollum. Like, this is the whole point, is that, not to get too far afield, but Frodo is constantly extending mercy to Gollum because he believes that Gollum can be redeemed, because he has to, because he knows he's losing his fight with the ring. He's being seduced by the ring.
And if Gollum can't be redeemed, then he can't be as well.
Exactly. So all the way up to the moment that everything comes crashing down and Gollum finally gets the ring back, but at the sacrifice of his own life, right? And
the Judas figure.
So,
right?
yes.
Yeah.
And so, this is the harshness. This is the overshadowing of glory. Is the testing is there on purpose. God left a third of the angels on earth to test men, after he cast 2/3 of them into darkness. And you're like, why would God allow the fallen angels to remain? Why a third? To test us? Well, that's not nice. It's like, you don't make the rules. Like, that's not how this works.
No, we have the central assertion that
that
testing is good and that God uses it for our benefit and not for our hurt and harm. We confess it boldly, despite our reluctance to actually say it is good, right? I mean, because we don't enjoy it, the experience of it.
I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Why are you tempting me? Or as Paul says, God will never tempt you beyond your ability to resist it.
Yeah, and in a psalm like Psalm 22, which we'll pray on Maundy Thursday, right? Stripping the altar. And it's clearly a psalm of Christ on the cross, and yet I think it is given to Christians to pray as well. My God, why have you forsaken me? Because that is the lament of the flesh. I mean, this is our experience.
Right. Oh, by the way, since you brought it up, look up the bulls of Bashan and what that actually is.
Okay.
Look up lions and look up what the lions are, right? These lions are there, and the bulls of Bashan, these strong bulls. Look up what the bulls of Bashan actually are and what they symbolize.
Yeah, just pray.
This is cosmic. Right, exactly. No, this is like, there's an entire sermon in that term, bulls of Bashan.
Ooh, nice.
And of course it goes to Daniel too, of course, because Daniel talks about these monsters that come out of the ocean that are then defeated by the king. Yeah.
So if we are sleepwalking into Armageddon, at least it'll be fun because we'll get to see all the monsters again.
Oh yeah, no, they're coming. Well, we're seeing the little ones come now, right?
Right, exactly.
And it's Pandora's box. I mean, it's the story about Pandora's box is when she cracks it open, the little ones come out first, and then the big ones explode out behind them.
Yeah, and then we see Leviathan come from the sea. That's pretty.
Yeah. But the comfort is that the psalmist and Job we're both told that God plays with them. And that's not in any other myth whatsoever. None of the other gods play with the Leviathan. They're killed by the Leviathan, but they're not playing with it. And God's like, yeah, I just play with him like a puppy. He's adorable. Which is why, by the way, to give you pastoral counsel, that's why in the picture on the wall, behind me, this picture of the cosmic mountain, and on the poster that I have on the whiteboard in my Bible class, God doesn't even bother killing Leviathan himself. He sends Michael. It's not even worth God's time to defeat the Leviathan. He's so beneath God. So he's like, Michael, you go deal with it.
And then by extension, I mean, we have some hymnody that does a great job on this. And of course, how we pray is how we believe, how we sing is how we believe. And talking about, just treating the devil with scorn, right? And just mocking him. And, we got that from Luther. Luther was good about that, but he picked it up, I think, from, just the way that, that God treats him, right? And especially, just as a plaything it seems so sterile, well, not sterile, just weak. But that's good, right? I mean, that's the relationship of God and the devil. We've harped on this for how many years now? It's not like equal forces and who's going to win the battle and da da da.
Right. What battle? What?
What battle? The battle's already won, right?
Right. Exactly. And so again, the sacrament which you received is the gift, not of man but of God, brought forth by him who blessed Abraham, the father of faith, whose grace and deeds we do admire. And then we've proved the sacraments of the church to be more ancient, and so on. And this bread, again, that you eat of, you'll never die. It's the body of Christ, which is why you should do it every day. So now, paragraph 48, consider whether the bread of angels be more excellent or the flesh of Christ, which is indeed the body of life. Because in the translation that they're using here, so man ate angels' food, right? Not heavenly bread, but angels' food.
I like
Is the bread of angels better than the flesh of Christ, the body of life? That manna came from heaven. This is above the heavens. That was of heaven. This is the Lord of the heavens. That was liable to corruption, if kept a second day. This is far from all corruption. For whosoever shall taste it holily, that is, sanctified, saintly, shall not be able to feel corruption. For them water flowed from the rock. For you, blood flowed from Christ. He said, for you.
Mm-hmm. He did.
Water, this is why I like Ambrose better than Augustine. Ambrose does this everywhere. Water satisfied them for a time. The blood satiates you for eternity. The Jew drinks and thirsts again.
Oh, yeah.
You, after drinking, will be beyond the power of thirsting. That was in a shadow. This is in the truth. I could have used this 2 weeks ago.
No,
last Sunday. This was reading last Sunday.
Yeah, with the feeding 5,000, right?
I was leaning on Gregory of Nyssa, which was great, but this would have been even greater, making all these connections. If that which you so wonder at is but shadow, how great must that be whose very shadow you wonder at? See now what happened in the case of the fathers was shadow. They drank, it is said, of that rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. But with many of them God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now these things were done in a figure, in a symbol concerning us. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 4. You recognize now which are the more excellent, for light is better than shadow, truth than a symbol, the body of its giver than the manna from heaven. Is that word for figure, is that topos?
It's tupos. Yeah, it's tupos.
Yeah, it is tupos, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is different than symbolon, which we translate as mystery or sign, or in the Gospels.
I like to translate it as type because it's just transliterate it and then define it.
Yeah,
what is a type?
I understand why you do that, and I quit doing that now because no one understands what that means.
We had that
so
conversation.
I just translate it as symbol, which we talked about a couple episodes ago.
Well,
it's just the point. Yeah.
It would be worth our while at some point. I mean, type didn't really get introduced into Christian theology until Gerhardt, actually, our theologian.
Yeah.
So it'd probably be worth us going and reading what he says about typology.
When people today hear figure, they mean figurative. They think figurative means
imaginary.
It's not it's imaginary. Yeah.
Right.
It's a figure of speech, right? I'm trying to describe something else in a figure of speech. I'm not actually talking about the thing.
Now you're speaking plainly. Remember that one?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
And not speaking
now, finally, you're speaking plainly.
And it's like, I just told you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood, right?
Right.
Yeah. Was that the one?
Yeah.
Oh, no, he's talking about his death and resurrection. I can't remember where that is. I'll have to look it up.
No, I think it's his death and resurrection.
It is death
Yeah,
and
because they're like,
resurrection,
what's going on right now? He's like,
because
it's
in John 15, 16, somewhere in there, right?
Now you're speaking plainly. He's like, guys, really? Because
John
then they
16.
immediately after that turn back around and go, what are we doing?
It's like John 16, 29 for those following along at home. And it's like those whole 3 chapters. We can hear it in faith. The problem with them is that Jesus does the very rabbinic style where it's repetitive and it's circular and he keeps hovering. It's like going around the drain, right? And you just keep going. You're like, could you just go down the drain? Nope, they're not ready yet. We have to go around again. We're going to do it again.
That's right.
We're going to do it again, which is a good method.
I think so.
But
those of us like myself who are thick.
I mean, what do you think about the shadow and the light kind of conversation? Because we were talking about this. What? You don't?
The present tense again. Well, yeah.
Well, because I'm thinking like I've taken great pains to demonstrate that the manna was a good gift from God. It did feed their body,
yes.
right? It did teach them faith, right, and to expect from God daily bread. Right. I mean, these things are real. They're not ahistorical or atheological. It's not just an example, but it but it was temporary. I think that's how I usually would phrase it. Right. And it was for a time. It's like Old Covenant, New Covenant. The Old Covenant is gone, the New Covenant has come, right? It fulfills the old. It doesn't diminish the old.
We use these words differently than what they were using them to explain.
Mm-hmm. I think so.
And as a consequence, language isn't static, it's dynamic. And we put our meaning, our definitions into words, regardless of whether it belongs there or not. Without asking, but is that the original meaning? Is that what they meant?
Right. Right.
And that's why you get things in the present tense like 1 Peter 3, which is, well, Noah and the flood is a figure. It's a type of baptism, but it's not a real baptism. It's like, well, yeah, no shit. I mean, like everyone died.
But they were saved from sin, death, and devil.
But they were
for a time.
saved from sin, death, and hell at the time, sin, death, in the world at the time. So that means that it is actually a baptism. But we don't use the term figure or type that way. So we don't understand that for Peter's listeners, that was not a problematic statement. Yeah. Whereas for us, we have to argue about spirit baptism with people.
Because we have the shadow language, what's that though? As like in a mirror dimly, but that doesn't, that phrase doesn't even work for people because we don't have dim mirrors. We have very vivid mirrors.
Right.
I
exactly.
mean, I can see you very clearly even through the internet.
Right.
I mean, it's quite a mirror.
Yes.
Whereas they would you would never see your own reflection in their world.
Right.
And if you did see it, it would be like on a silver cup or something, right? I mean,
polished, something that was polished to a sheen so that you could see.
And maybe glass, but I mean, the light would have to hit it just right.
For you to have glass. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think the modernization of like mirrored glass isn't even until after the colonies.
Yeah, the symbolism of mirrors is just a whole other thing. Well, they were also considered evil, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Very dangerous. Yeah. I shouldn't say evil. They were considered extremely
Are we going
dangerous.
back to Snow White again? Okay.
Well, there is that point. Yeah, actually. The danger of mirrors is that they're actual doors. Like mirrors are doors. They're portals. They're designed
but
they look like portals. They're designed to look like portals.
But they're also liars. I mean,
and they're also liars. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Or truth tellers, maybe. I don't know. It could be both, I suppose.
If you follow me on Instagram, I actually posted a video about Snow White this morning about beauty on this very topic.
Okay. So there you go.
That explains this. Because again, beauty is of God. Goodness, truth, and beauty. Beauty is actually objective. It's not assigned. You can't assign beauty. There's an objective beauty. And the point is, as soon as you assign beauty to something, it ceases to be good.
Yeah. I saw a post that was trying to describe female beauty with with other categories. So there was gorgeous and hot
adjectives.
And you're like, they're women. You know, and just the nature of woman for a man is beautiful. I think. Right.
Well, it was originally.
Distort that. Bone
of my bone, flesh. Well, again, if Adam were to say she's gorgeous, that would be then again it implies that you're ugly. That's the point, though. Again, the
it's contrast, right? You're setting as compared to other women or something.
She is me. She is me. I see me in her. Now you're equal. You're on the same footing, right? And so you're saying of her what you say about yourself. That is, in relation to God, you are seen the same. As soon as you start saying things like he's handsome, she's this, he's that, you're forgetting that the implication is I'm not that. Because
I think the grossest is the number scale. It just drives me crazy. I don't know why people
1 through 10. No, she's an 11.
Oh, she's a 6 or whatever.
Yeah,
you're like, whatever.
That's my point, though, is that you're applying the rule of law to something that is given as gift, and saying, well, this isn't as good as. And now we're back to lust and adultery and so forth. But no, that's the purpose. This is why the queen in the story, the queen is beautiful. Period. And the mirror lies to her and says, who is the most beautiful of all? And that word most and the word all.
Now you're into scale and comparison.
Now you're into scale. Now you're under the law. And now you see what it does to her, of course, is that in the end, she disfigures herself so that she can get close enough to steal Snow White's beauty away from her.
Well, and the absurdity of it is she makes herself gross, right?
That's what I'm saying.
And she wasn't not beautiful.
She was beautiful. That's the point. She's as beautiful as Snow White in the beginning of the story, which is why, by the way, they get this in the cartoon. If you look at the witch, or the queen, sorry, if you look at the queen and you look at Snow White at the beginning of the movie, they're actually mirror images of each other.
Mm-hmm. They're different but the same.
They're exactly the same. They have rose red lips, pale white skin, black eyebrows. They're the same. They're almost mirror images. That's the point. And the witch, the queen, she engages in her witchy ways, knowing if I do this, I can never come back and be the person I was. But I'll sacrifice it. Again, there it is. I'm going to sacrifice it to steal her beauty from her so that now we're both ugly together. Now we're both destroyed. She'd rather destroy
everything down. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And there's the fall again, right? And of course, the dwarves are the 7 virtues.
Well, that's the thing about beautiful, isn't it? Because it's not a comparison. It is, and we would define beauty then as from God, right?
Right.
Yeah. And so, and he defines what's beautiful then, which is what he has made.
Right. Right.
Is beautiful.
And in the story then, not the original, well, the original, it's the 7 virtues, and it's very clear. She's surrounded by virtues, which is why she never asked the question, am I beautiful or not? And notice where she lives at, in the wilderness. And she's surrounded by the 7 virtues and cared for by the animals. She's Eve. That's who she is. She's Eve. And of course, the queen is the serpent. That's the premise of the story. Whereas in the modern retelling, each one of the dwarves, even though they're still virtuous, they seek to reinforce her beauty as a juxtaposition to her.
How is Sleepy virtuous?
That's what I'm saying. Like each one of them reinforces her virtue, but they themselves aren't necessarily
as
virtuous.
opposite, by way of opposite.
Yeah,
okay.
Right.
Okay.
That each one reinforces her. You have Grumpy, she's sweet. He's lazy, she works. He's dopey, she's intelligent. Versus in the original, the 7 virtues actually are there to highlight and raise her up even higher to say, you're still not as you're not as high as you need to be. Like you're Eve.
Well, and
you need to be
this is
higher.
the exhortation from Paul, whatever's good. Think on these things. Think on these things. So, because if you dwell below, you're going to be dragged into the below, right?
Right. Which is so sad now that I think about it, because again, it's the same premise for Cinderella, the cartoon, is that literally all of these Disney princesses, they're all actually Eve. They're all symbolic of Eve. So watching these as a little girl, that should actually drive you to the symbolic meaning of these characters, which is that
where's my Adam?
Where's my Adam? Exactly. That's the subtext of every single one is where's Adam? And then Adam comes in every story. The original stories, it's a little weirder, especially Snow White. For those of you who don't know, he has sex with her while she's asleep, and then when she's giving birth, she wakes up. But
that's nice.
Still the point. Yeah, I mean, the Genesis is still there. Just weird. But the point is then always, it's pointing us back to what we said at the beginning, which is that all of these fairy tales, these folk tales, they're all pointing us back to Genesis and saying, there's a higher truth here. And the symbolism of these characters in the story is to point us back to what you are doing in the present tense is not the original intent. This is not who you're supposed to be. And so the wicked queen, the stepsisters and stepmother Cinderella, the witch that cast the spell on Sleeping Beauty, all these things. These are the world. These are the devil. This is sin. These are the vices, right?
Well, right, because Snow White, it starts with death. You don't have her mother, right?
Right.
You have this broken family,
same thing in Cinderella.
Marriage.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then that.
Which
that
again,
gets
by the way,
right.
just subtext within subtext. Again, Walt Disney grew up without a father, and so all of his characters, of course, that he's attracted to, are people that grew up without fathers or parents. Again, Bambi's even the same. His mom's killed. And then other people absorb that, like George Lucas and...
the orphan story, right?
The orphan story, exactly. The people that make these movies and wrote these books themselves grew up without parents. And they're attracted to these tropes. And again, reality will infiltrate and force you to come and fall in line with it, and not the other way around. It will not conform to you. And this is the story, all these folk tales are telling you this, is when you try to force reality to conform to your version of beauty or happiness or godliness, you're not going to change reality. Reality is going to change you into a monster. Like you're going to be exposed for the monster you are. And the reason we're talking about this within the context of the sacrament is the Lord's Supper reveals you for the saint that you are, for the Adam or Eve that God created you to become. That's the mirror darkly that Paul talks about, is that in the present tense, in spite of, again, sin and the world and the devil, the sacrament and baptism and the gospel say, but that's not the story. That's not how the story ends. The story ends with you being crowned in glory and becoming like God. That's the point. You will be equal to angels, but not become angels.
Although, he does quote Paul here, and that lesson of the manna is also at hand, is that it can you can sin against Christ by receiving the sacrament outside of faith.
Right. Don't eat the apple. She literally holds an apple out. It's like, don't eat the apple. Right.
Right.
It's in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Don't eat the dates or the figs.
I know, and
the figs are dates.
But the challenge here, it's figs.
The monkey eats the figs. Yeah.
Right. Maybe it is dates. I don't know. Well, it doesn't matter.
Might be
fruit.
It's the fruit. Yeah, it's the fruit.
No, this is a challenge, right? Because it's clear that God feeds his people, whether they deserve it or have earned. There's no merit involved.
Exactly. Without any worthiness or merit in me, God gives me manna.
Correct. Yeah. Right. But that they can be received outside of faith. That would be to receive the manna the next day, right? Because then you're going to receive it in death because it's going to be dying, right? worms and stinking and all of that.
Right.
You know, and I'm not. It's a little bit of a struggle, because we always are committing people to the sacrament, and yet we also know that the Lord would have them do it in faith, right? And so we preach for faith, which is what he's doing here, right? I mean, this is sacramental preaching. They've been baptized and they're going to the supper, and here's what you're going to receive, right? And so, and maybe that's the point, is we put the burden on individual examination, or on pastoral examination. And in both cases, what that actually is preaching the word for faith, right?
Right. No,
so that you believe.
Exactly.
Right. And you're like, well, how do one examine? You say this is for your forgiveness. And you're like, oh, it's for my forgiveness. This is Christ's body and blood. It's Christ's body and blood. I mean, this is how it works. Children do this more readily than adults.
I think
but right.
The thing that we run into then with talk of forgiveness is that it's, again, not attached to an object.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And also it's not attached to the big picture. It's not just God doesn't remember your sins right now or tomorrow. It's that when you eat this, the gates of Eden are open to you again. And you are now free to enter in. And again, like I said in my sermon a couple of weeks ago, when the gates of Eden are open, you're actually now invited into the middle of the garden to eat the fruit from the tree of life, which is the body and blood of Jesus.
Which is Christ's cross, right?
So you're born once through the water and blood of a woman, all of us are, but then you're born again through the water and blood of Christ, which comes from his side, which are then given to you in baptism and the sacrament of the altar.
As the woman came from the side of Adam, so we come from the side of Christ, right? Yeah.
Christ. And just as your earthly mother, the front door is always open to you, God willing, but yet sometimes it's not. Not every earthly mother opens the door to you, right? Not every door is unlocked. So not everybody can say that they have an earthly mother, for example, that always welcomes them back home and sits them down and feeds them. Or your mom's dead and that door is closed to you now. That's the manna in the wilderness. But the door of your mother, big M mother, the church, big C church, Christ, that door is always open. And therefore that food that leads to heaven and eternal life is always open to you. And so, I have apple trees, I have pear trees, I have cherry trees, I have elderberry bushes. I have fruit coming out my ears every summer now. But there's also bees and hornets and wasps and bugs and birds that come and eat the fruit. And I have 2 elderberry bushes. One is rent. Like the birds come and strip it as soon as it blossoms. That's rent. The other one is ours. And again, I joke about it, but it's 100% true. The birds, for whatever reason, leave one bush alone and only eat off the other bush. And I'm like, there's God right there. I have 2 bushes and the birds get the one and I get the other one. And that's the work of God there. And there's meaning behind that. But that's going to run out. And yet every time you come to the altar, the fruit is there, and it won't be, again, it's the parable of the sower. The birds are not going to come and snatch away the bread of Christ or the fruit. And so would you rather count on the apple tree in your backyard producing fruit every season, or do you want to count on the gates of Eden being open to you and being able to eat from the tree of life that Adam and Eve were barred from eating?
Well, that's where this chapter has been so helpful, because, as we said, the manna it teaches us of the sacrament, but it doesn't tell us everything about the sacrament. Right.
It's the mystery. Exactly.
It's lesser to greater. I think that's probably a fair way to put it. And that way, this is what people do with Passover, manna. They say, well, then that means that we have to do this in the Lord's Supper. And it's like, no, that doesn't work that way. The Lord's Supper pre-exists. It's preordained. We can learn something of the supper from the manna story, but we don't learn everything. What we need to know about the supper is what Jesus says, right? This is my body.
Right.
This is
it's not the main thing. And I think, too, again, it comes back to this whole point of you're too materialistic about your understanding of eating and drinking at that point.
Yeah.
And versus and this is something I really appreciate about Pajot and that conversation that group is having, and even Martin Shaw and Jordan's a part of that too, is when you really dig in to, let's say this actually, since we're talking about, you really dig into the sacrament of the altar. If you really dig in, it is quickly apparent that you don't understand what's happening. Right? The body of God is uniting with this earthly material. I don't understand how that's possible.
And
look, here's some words. But words are techne, right? Words are some of the first techne. Yeah. And words obfuscate. Words are trying to describe something that is inside my head. It's a thought. So then I'm trying to understand what's in the head of God, the mind of God, right? And how I can't do that. I can't comprehend the mind of God. That's why he sends him, that's why he comes embodied in a man and says, well, this is as close as we're going to get on this side of the resurrection. And then in the resurrection, it won't matter anymore, so we won't have to have this conversation. But then if you dig even deeper into the mystery of it, and you read Ambrose, or you read Chrysostom or others, Irenaeus, and you realize like they're taking you even deeper. It's like we talked about with Capon. Like I thought I knew the gospel until I read Robert Capon. And then I read I'm like, oh, I'm just wading in the water of this ocean that he's inviting me to swim
or
in.
Skimming
right?
The surface or something.
Yeah, 100%. It's the same thing when I read the early fathers on the mysteries. Is like, oh no, I'm not even like I'm wading in the kiddie pool, and they're inviting me to go into but they're just saying let's swim in the deep end. They're not saying let's go out past the breakers because that's death out there, and so rather than just take for granted in this very hyper materialistic understanding of these things, well, this is bread, this is wine, and God's here, and this is how it happens. It's like that's very mechanical. It's very, very again mechanistic. Very sterile and barren, actually, and that's fine. It's downstream. It's very far downstream from a higher meaning. But if we just acknowledge that we don't understand what's happening, and that this is the beauty, this is the freedom of the gifts, is you don't have to know. You don't have to. And in fact, the more you seek to know, the more unhappy you're going to become, because you're trying to control it now. You're trying to have some sway over something that God himself has said, I'll just give it to you. It's fine. Don't worry about it. I'll provide, like the manna. And you saw what happened to the Israelites who kept demanding more or something else, right? And I think that's the thing, is that once you embrace the mystery, all of a sudden this panoramic view opens up for you, like we were talking about in the pre-show of once you walk through the door into this other world, there's no, I mean, even if you come back, you're changed by the experience so that you'd never fit in again. And that's why you and I as pastors, and I'm sure others listening, that's why you seem so weird to other Christians.
That's what I was going to say too. Yeah.
Yeah. You literally stepped over the threshold into a world, not only historically by going into the past, but heavenly spiritually. You've stepped through a door, and you're standing with the whole host of heaven that you're a part of now. And you're looking around going, oh, you mean I have something in common with Adam and Abraham and David? Yes. Everything. Yeah. You have everything in common with them. Because I was their God too, and I called them the same way I called you, and I gave them the same thing that I've given you. And so pay attention. And then you visit with them, and you're like, oh, I get it. That's why you're talking this way. You're not trying to explain this like it's a recipe for a cake. You're literally just saying like, look, and just revel in and celebrate the fact that this is happening. And it's okay to not know how or understand it. Like, it's better that you don't. Because that's the magic, that's the enchantment, is that thing.
Well, and maybe this is the answer to my question then about the sacrament and receiving it outside of faith, and that Jesus says, that a lot of we try to present the story of the Scripture in a way that you can delight in it, right, and find joy in it, and because it explains reality. I made an assertion in the sermon this week. That you can't actually understand your story without Christ crucified. It's the only way you can actually understand your life is under the cross. Right. Which it was a throwaway line. I mean, I said a lot of things. I don't know how many people stopped to think, like, what does that actually mean? Right. Which I could expand just on that one idea. Maybe that's its own sermon. But the challenge, but that it was in the context of a sermon about how the cross is rejected, by the mocking crowds, right? They walk by wagging their heads. The chief priest scribes, they say, "Oh, he could save himself," and so you have both reactions are possible. Yeah, it can be received for joy and for delight, and there's my salvation, or it can be received with great horror and rejection and scorning and mocking, right? And that happens with the sacrament too, right? And this is because it's the greatest good, but it's also it's impossible for reason to comprehend, and so it maybe the examination job. The question is, do you believe it? Yes, and that's as far as we can go. I mean, because I don't try to explain it. Now you're gonna end up rejecting it if you try to explain it, right? Because you're gonna say,
well, it can't. Joke. It's like explaining the recipe that you used, the ingredients that you used when you made these muffins or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? It's like,
yeah.
how did you make this cake? Well, let me explain to you the ingredients. And
I was going to bed last night,
da-da-da-da-da.
and Anne's like, I forgot to put garlic in the soup. I'm like, it was a great soup. I didn't even think because she doesn't use a recipe. She just makes soup. And because she's a cook, right? I mean, she just makes things. She's like, I have these ingredients. I'm going to put them together. I was like, I should have put garlic in. I'm like, it was good soup. Like, it's okay. We didn't have to have garlic this time, right?
I wonder too,
yeah.
I've been chewing on this lately, listening to others, is that in the Middle Ages, for example, like Aquinas does this, I think, is that they also equate righteousness with beauty. And I have to do more digging on it to understand the roots of this. But to be righteous is to be beautiful, because they equate God and they equate Jesus as being good and true and beautiful. And so to be the righteousness of God is to be the beauty of God. And we usually use the term glory, right? Glory literally means beauty in this sense. And
right.
And so to your point then, that he says, I've not yet been glorified, beatified, beautified, is when we look at the cross of shame, the cross of disgrace and so forth, God says, there's my beauty. And then he says, I made Jesus to become sin so that you might become the beauty of God, the righteousness of God. Because it goes along with forgiveness purifies. It restores your virtue. It cleanses you, which makes you beautiful. And maybe to your point, then that's where you extrapolate upon that is, well, what does it even mean to be good or beautiful or true? Well, apart from Jesus, there is no goodness, beauty, or truth, which goes back to Snow White and these other fairy tales again. Because you see them rejecting goodness, beauty, and truth. They're actually rejecting God. They're taking the fruit.
Even though they already have it.
Even though they already have it, exactly. Which, as I've said before, then when I minister to women in particular, but also men who have given away their virginity or given away their virtue, and they are ashamed of that, embarrassed, they feel guilt or whatever, or even blame, I remind them that once you are baptized, you are purified in Christ. You are virtuous, you are virginal, and you are beautiful.
And daily, right? Restoration.
Daily.
Renewal.
Exactly, daily. That you are daily drowned and put to death so that you may be raised again to new life. And when I say new life, and this is where we extrapolate upon these terms so that they're not just forensic categories, it means that your family, your friends, your ex, whatever, they can look at you and call you whore. They can say that you gave away your virtue, that you'll never be able to get it back. They're looking down. They're looking down at the earth. They're looking down into the wilderness, into the scrub brush, and they're describing what they see, which is, scarcity, famine, ugliness, a scorched, cracked earth, chaos. They see a person not under their control anymore. There's a lot of things that go into this.
And there's a lot of confession by projection, though, too.
Yes, there is. But if you look up the cosmic mountain, if you embrace the model, if you look up, you see Jesus. You look past the fig trees, you look past the serpent, you look past the knowledge of good and evil, and you look at the tree of life and you see Jesus and the angels there. And you see the entire cosmos crowning him. And now all of a sudden, Jesus says, you're beautiful. And it's the glory of, again, Moses shining with the glory of God, is that you radiate, like when angels look at you, all they see is beauty. They just see radiant beauty and goodness and truth because you're in Christ. And so it's no small thing then to say, well, I don't want to follow Christ. It's like, oh, you don't like what's good and beautiful and true? You don't like angels glorifying God because when they look at you, they sing for joy? You don't like that? Because in Revelation, that's kind of what they say. It's in the reading for Sunday, 1 Thessalonians 4. The archangel, the trumpet blast, the angels, it's all there. And you don't want that? You'd rather have people walking around gossiping about you, ruining your reputation, calling you this, that, and the other terrible thing? Or you could just come into the house of God and be told the truth about yourself? Wouldn't you want that?
Right, but rather than defining, I guess, yourself, that's the language of today, right? Defining yourself by your lovers, so to speak.
Exactly.
Right? Thinking of Ezekiel, you look to the lover, Jesus, who loves you with a perfect love. Yeah.
And that is proven to be true for you, specifically at the altar. Because I can say it to you and you can say, well, but Pastor, you don't know how bad I am or what happened. You're right, I don't. But I can sympathize. However, if you come here and I give you the body and blood, or I come to you with the body and blood, guess what? It doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter what I know or don't know. It doesn't matter what you know or don't know. All that matters is what he declares to you, which is that, yeah, you're beautiful. Here's the proof.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
But
a
we
nice
don't
sermon.
talk
That'd be a
that
good
way, and so
sermon.
people don't take the sacraments seriously.
Yeah, I've struggled with that personally. It's because it's so
it's
poetic.
uncomfortable at first. Yes.
Yeah, but it's also poetic, and it sounds almost, well, it's mystical, right? There's that too.
It is,
it's
of
a
course,
mystery.
it's mystical. Yeah, it's a hidden meaning.
And so then it's like, well, Pastor, you're just talking up in the clouds. I'm like, yeah, come up, come up in the clouds with me.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Soar with the eagles,
Right.
baby.
The-
You
it's
can
a
wallow with the
beautiful
pigs
view.
if you want, but
It's a beautiful view. Yeah, yeah. You
And
think
so-
too. You think too small, too little, too low.
yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
And that ultimately then affects how you think of Jesus. Yeah.
of course. Yeah, it's unfortunately one of the consequences of the Reformation is that forensic justification allowed later movements, especially the English Reformation, for example, to strip the symbolism and the meaning and the mysticism out of everything and make everything purely forensic. This word is enough. Enough for who? Right? Well, in order to do that, in order to argue that, you kind of have to play fast and loose with original sin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
well, maybe
if
even,
I'm in
maybe
bondage
even,
to sin and cannot free myself, or even more seriously, like we were talking about, and I was explaining a couple of weeks ago, that when you incense the altar, you're driving away the spirits and power of darkness that's tried to inhabit your building. And people are like, what the hell did you just say? This is a church. I'm like, no, it's a building.
right.
It's a church when Christ is present and his body is
Sanctified by
located
word.
here.
Right. Yeah.
Sanctified by word and sacrament. And so in the interim, there's a lot of stuff that happens in this building during the week that isn't very sanctified. And not naughty stuff, just the fact that you have sinners occupying the building and doing sinner stuff. And so incensing the altar literally comes from the word in Akkadian for purification. You're driving out evil spirits that would seek to inhabit this building. And it is, again, a modern naivety or willful ignorance to think that your building cannot be occupied by powers of darkness when you have sinners occupying the space.
But it says church
so
on the
what-
outside.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry.
It's magic. Yeah, no, it's, yeah. And so instead of...
We consecrated it back in 1902.
Yeah, that's
You're
right.
like, okay.
That's right. It's consecrated. Once saved, always saved, right?
Right.
And once holy, always holy. And if that were true, you would die when you walk through the door, actually. There's biblical
yes.
precedent for this. And so we're not saying it's not a holy place. It's not God's house. Of course it's God's house. But my house is sanctified to the Lord also. As for me and my children, we will glorify and sanctify the Lord. But you know
But by
what?
the same means, by the word of God
There's a
and
lot
prayer.
of sinning going on in my house too.
Right. So word of God and
Yeah.
prayer. I mean, this is a
Exactly.
This is why daily prayers around the table with your family.
Exactly.
And
Yes.
it's not just a pious exercise, but it's actually it's doing what it says. Right. It's setting
In fact,
it aside.
if you want to combat evil, and I mean this like in a very physical, historical way, where does your family gather together the most often? Is it the kitchen? Is it the living room? It's usually around the TV. Take your TV, put it in a side room, and then make that room where you gather the most often into the hearth, into the altar, the room where you gather around the Lord instead. Doesn't mean you have to throw out your TV, but just recognize your TV is your altar, and you need to move it out of the center place.
Or like if you're, well, this is what we do. If you're going to pray in that room, shift the focus, right? Where you sit, where you focus, where you turn your
That's
back
because he has
to
a
it.
home theater system, and he doesn't want to upset the acoustics.
It's not just the acoustics. It's like the only place
See,
to
there we
put
go. Liar.
It.
No,
That is
I
my li-
understand. I
that's-
understand too. You have to compromise. There's compromises. There's a sacrifice that has to be made. But I know. I understand. It was a big move for me too. It hurt. And I had to break down my old temple and fragment it into pieces throughout my house. But
I would build a new
No,
temple.
it's just-
It would be more glorious than the last one.
well, I do have a 60-inch TV at the foot of my bed. But that's a whole other conversation.
I do have dreams of building my own listening space. So,
I know. You and me both. I know. Every once in a while, I look past the TV to the wall and think to myself, I could just make the wall into a screen and then hook a projector up above my bed. That makes more sense.
or you could just make it disappear when you're not using it. So then it's not like it's that.
I know. I've had all these thoughts. I covet. But the point is then that, yeah, every morning we get up and we gather in the hearth, around the hearth, and we have chapel and we celebrate the sacrament. And we sanctify our day. At the beginning of the day, we sanctify it. Then we go do our chores. Then we go to our work, enjoy, as the rite says. And because you start off the day that way and you end the day that way.
Right.
And then you recognize that, again, there are cosmic powers at work, and that it's a mystery to us how this occurs and what's happening. But yet, biblically, it's all there. Luther writes extensively in his letters of spiritual counsel about this.
Right.
And you recognize that somewhere between the Enlightenment and now, we lost an entire library of valuable material that teaches us how to see and how to speak about that, and how to see in faith, and how to judge the world both for good and ill, and recognize these spiritual powers, both, again, the angels who lend us their strength, but also these fallen angels and these spirits that fight against that and seek the worship and authority for themselves.
I think it's worse. I mean, it's not just that we lost it, but we rejected it. I mean,
yeah, we rejected. I guess that's what I mean. Yeah, is that we just went,
because lost sounds like it just kind of fell out of use, and that might be true in some places. That might be true.
I fell in love. Did you?
But I do think it's more conspiratorial than that. It's like we can't be teaching this because we're not going to be accepted in civil society, especially Roman society, right? And that's the Christendom critique that we've spent a lot of time on in episodes past, like 300 episodes ago, but it is true that if you start talking, this is crazy talk, right? I mean, you're weird. You're like, I don't need to be captivated by all of these ideas and these false teachings and government propaganda or whatever it is, right? Which is another kind of religious text. I don't need that, and I'm going to live apart from that. And it's like, well, no, you can't do that because you live in this world. I'm like, I do live in this world, but I don't have to live like this world. I don't have to live in, as the world does.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think the only false doctrine nowadays is to say that Jesus isn't God. Amongst Christians, most Christians, there's only one false teaching, and that's to say Jesus isn't God.
Oh, you mean that's as low as the standard has gone? Oh, I see.
Yeah, that's kind of where we're at is, well, don't you care that they deny the sacraments? Well, Pastor, we all believe basically the same thing. Yeah, Jesus isn't God. Well, we don't believe that. Yeah. Proof. And that then chapter 9, we're not going to go too deep into chapter 9 because we're at 1 hour and 38, but in order that no one through observing the outward part should waver in faith, many instances are brought forward wherein the outward nature has been changed. And so it is proved that bread is made the true body of Christ. The treatise then is brought to a termination with certain remarks as to the effects of the sacrament, the disposition of the recipients, and such like. So perhaps you will say, I see something else. How is it that you assert that I received the body of Christ? Well, there you go. And this is the point which remains for us to prove. What evidence shall we make use of? Let us prove that this is not what nature made, but what the blessing consecrated. And the power of blessing is greater than that of nature, because by blessing nature itself is changed.
Oof. That's lovely. That's lovely.
Yeah.
Because that, what is today? Nature is the highest God, right?
Yes. To consecrate, to bless is to set apart. It is to separate out.
But it's the word that made nature is the word that can change nature, right?
Yes.
Or that even transcends nature.
Exactly. So Moses was holding a rod. He cast it down and it became a serpent. Exodus 4. Again, he took hold of the tail of the serpent and it returned to the nature of a rod. You see that by virtue of the prophetic office, there were two changes of the nature, both of the serpent and of the rod. The streams of Egypt were running with a pure flow of water. Of a sudden, from the veins of the sources, blood began to burst forth, and no one could drink of the river. It's interesting because, again, the Eastern Fathers point out that historically the reason is because Pharaoh's sorcerers killed so many children by the river that their blood turned the river to blood. It wasn't red algae. They sacrificed so many virgins, so many children to combat Moses and Aaron.
Well,
downstream of that.
Right? I mean, that was the thing. Yeah.
Yeah. That they killed so many of Israel's children. Thank you for that.
I like this picture. I like this picture of the vein. Well, maybe their own too. I mean, who knows? Yeah. But that it's a vein. So it's coming from So, like, is it in reserve and then the vein is opened and it flows forth, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
We don't think
They
of
were running
rivers
with
as
it.
organic that way, but they are.
They are, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the veins run out from the heart, and the heart has 4 rivers running out from it that then form the tributaries for all other rivers.
Oh, I forget. Oh, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
The 4 rivers. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Another pattern.
Yep. So the streams of Egypt were running with a pure flow of water. Of a sudden, from the veins of the sources, blood began to burst forth, and no one could drink the river. Again, at the prophet's prayer, the blood ceased, and the nature of water returned. The people of the Hebrews were shut in on every side, hemmed in on the one hand by the Egyptians, on the other by the sea. Moses lifted up his rod, the water divided and hardened like walls. A wind, it says, a wind from the Lord blew and opened them up.
Mm-hmm.
Moses lifted up his rod, the walls stood up like walls, and a way for the feet appeared between the waves. Jordan, being turned back, returned, contrary to nature, to the source of its stream in Joshua 3. Is it not clear that the nature of the waves of the sea and of the river stream was changed? The people of the fathers thirsted. Moses touched the rock, and water flowed out of the rock. Exodus 17. Did not grace work a result contrary to nature, so that the rock poured forth water, which by nature it did not contain? Mara was a most bitter stream, so that the thirsting people could not drink. Moses cast wood into the water, and the water lost its bitterness, which grace of a sudden tempered. Exodus 15. In the time of Elisha, the prophet, one of the sons of the prophets lost the head from his axe, which sank. He who had lost the iron asked Elisha, who cast in a piece of wood, and the iron swam. This too we clearly recognize as having happened, contrary to nature, for iron is, of course, heavier by nature than water.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That's a deep scriptural knowledge here from him to draw those together.
Yes. And also recognizing then that every single one of these things, because again, I attended an ELCA seminary, so I have the counter argument for every one of these in hand.
I'm sure you do.
All of these can be explained naturally, as I was taught. That the wood he threw in, of course, had properties within it that allowed the water to be purified by the properties. Quail are migratory patterns. The river of blood was red algae. You'll notice that to deny that God works through means to just say, well, but God can't work through certain things. He only works in certain other ways. Versus, well, no, again, before Moses and the people walked through the desert, God created an aquifer below this rock, which is why the angel of the Lord was standing on the rock when Moses and the elders of Israel came over the hill and went, what's over there? Well, the angel of the Lord's standing over on that rock. We should probably go over there. That's where the water's at. Which is a fantastic tale, by the way, because the people are complaining. We're all going to die of thirst. Moses and the elders just walk over the hill. And on the other side of the hill, a little ways off, there's an oasis.
That's how I was presented to the children. If they had just been a little bit more patient.
Exactly.
That's just one more day, guys.
But the angel of the Lord appeared over the rock and said, hit the rock here. And you can say, well, but the aquifer was below the rock, so it's not supernatural. And it's like, no, you're right. It isn't supernatural. God actually put the water there before Moses and Israel even came across the desert, so that when they did, that would be waiting for them.
Well, that was the assertion I was going to make. It's not God against nature or overcoming nature. It's actually nature was made for man by God, right? And he uses it, and it's not supernatural. It's being used for its intended purpose. Right,
which was to
provide
water,
sustain
in the wilderness.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. To preserve their life.
I bring this up because, again, in modernity, we think that history is a series of accidents, right? Everything's an accident, and therefore we then have to backfill in the accidents to asking, like, but how could God have known? Or, well, God works contingently, right? That this happened, so then as a consequence, God did this to counter that. And it's always a series of, like, checks and mates, right? Versus like, well, no, the early fathers, the early exegetes understood that there's, Irenaeus says it, there's no accidents. With God, there is no accidents. Everything has a purpose and a meaning that's there before you got there. It's your job to ask God to tell you what's the purpose and meaning of this event or this thing. And so after the fact, like we talked about with Matthew and Isaiah, Matthew's just asking, hey, God, what does this mean? And then the Spirit says, it's actually, it's just revealing Jesus. And it's also revealing God's grace in the moment that Isaiah was standing before the throne. And this is to reveal God's grace in the wilderness, to say, yeah, I made this for you. Well, how could you possibly have known we'd be here? Well, because I planned this. That's why. This is the plan.
I think the other thing here that's very helpful exercise, I do this, and we've been advocating for it, and it's nice to read it in somebody, right? Is this pattern recognition, is to say, well, okay, how can God do such great things? Certainly not just, the word of the water, but the word of God in and with the water, right? They're like, okay, water and word, where have we had this before, right?
Everywhere.
And then what happened in those times, like he did here, he went through them. It's like each time the word had the water do things that water doesn't normally do, but it did do. Because the word said so. The word that made it said it. And Jesus demonstrates this. He commands the waters, right? Frequently.
Which, I just had a head slapper. Now I understand why all the early church fonts were made out of stone. That's why. The Norman churches all have stone fonts.
Oh,
This is the reason why
instead
they have
of wood,
stone fonts, because water from the stone. Yeah. There we go. So much smarter than we are.
Now you need a new font.
Anyways. No, I've been talking for a month and a half about that one. Sometime, somewhere, I'm going to get a stone font. Speaking of cementing your legacy, literally. So we observe then that grace has more power than nature. And yet so far we have only spoken of the grace of a prophet's blessing. But if the blessing of man had such great power as to change nature, what are we to say of that divine consecration, where the very words of the Lord and Savior operate, which is, I was just about to say that. That's the power that he gives to his ministers to say, on the night in which he was betrayed, our Lord Jesus Christ took bread, etc., take and eat. This is the body of Christ given into death for you. Take and drink. This is the blood of Christ shed for you for the forgiveness of sins.
Gracious
It's
gift.
the same power.
Yes.
It's the same power, that it's not me who's changing the bread and wine, the natural into something quote unquote supernatural, but the word of God that's working through me, who's changed me from something natural into now something that is supernatural, quote unquote supernatural, to say like, and this is the thing, again, what does this mean? That your minister is in the office of Adam. And because Adam was the first priest and prophet.
Naming things, yes.
Naming things. And that the power of the naming comes from the authority of the one who gives Adam to name the things.
Right.
Which is why after God then boots them out of the garden, and Adam names Eve his wife, mother of all the living, it could be said as a confession of faith. It can also be said as a rebellion against God, because there's only one who has life, and it's not her. She's not the mother.
Well, it's deeply ironic, right? Because
it is deeply ironic regardless. It is very paradoxical because there's no explanation given, and if you read the original grammar, it's not clear whether it's one or the other. So I tend to just say it's both, but it's both and simul. But it is interesting that we do that. And we do it now when someone gets pregnant. Oh, you're having a baby. We made life. Oh, did you? Did you make life? Did you? And the answer is, yes, you did. But how much control over that did you actually have? I'm pretty sure your body did it without you consciously needing to be involved.
Right.
There's women in comas that have babies.
Yeah, it's that strange dichotomy. It's like, well, did you cooperate with God? I suppose in one sense you could say that.
In one sense, against or with your will, yes.
Yeah.
But regardless.
But in another sense, it's like, no, God knit the child together in your womb.
Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Did he do it through your activity? Sure.
Yes.
But,
exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Could he have done it without you? Yes. As is proven by the virgin whose name is Mary, who is the Theotokos. So,
but he's not going to give his body and blood for forgiveness of sins apart from someone picking up the bread and saying, and the cup and saying, take and drink it.
And you said this earlier, and I think it goes to this point, is that, because again, St. Ephraim the Syrian is, I love this guy because he's a poet. And so everything he writes exegetically is in Semitic poetry. Is that, you said that earlier, that mysticism sounds poetic, and it's because that's actually the only way that you can come close to grasping what's happening. Because what poetry and song do is they're attempting to express a universal truth in a way that is art, that only art can do, because art is allowed to function symbolically, and it's allowed to function at the level of meaning, right?
Right.
And other things cannot do that, like like science, like techne, and I mean science broadly speaking, like techne. And so to explain these things, the people that are writing these things, especially in the early church, as we've noted, but also David does this, right? The prophets do this because the original text of the prophets is poetic. It's Semitic poetry. This is actually the only and best way that we have available to us to express these highest of all truths. And so in the present tense, because we've largely rejected these things, as you noted, when we do talk this way, we're accused of mysticism, as if it's a negative. Like, oh, you're just floating away into the ether. It's like, no, I'm not. I'm very grounded in the flesh and in material things. What I'm trying to point out to you is that all of these earthly things are covered by the heavenly things, the heavenly meaning of them.
They can't even be understood apart from that. Yeah.
Exactly. Which is why then we revert to saying, well, but the bread and wine they just represent his body and blood. He's not actually here. It's like, no, he actually is. He's actually here.
To me, it would be like, if it only represents, then why would I even bother receiving it?
Right, exactly. Right.
What's the point?
Well, why can't I can do it at home with steak and potatoes. Like, this steak represents his body, and this glass of milk represents his blood. It's spiritual milk. Paul talks about spiritual milk. And this is spiritual meat, so it's the same thing, right? It represents something. And it's like, well, actually, that's half true. The meat and the milk that you drink at home is to point you to the higher food that satisfies forever. And the manna in the wilderness was meat, and it was milk, and it was...
But you don't boil the kid in its mother's milk.
But you don't boil the kid in his mother's milk. Exactly. It all has
I don't know how to apply that, but I'm thinking about it.
Exactly. All day today. But it just goes to the point then, again, we forget that the Reformation is kind of the hinge, historically speaking, where Luther and his contemporaries were still grounded in the medieval world, because they're still medievals, as much as we want to make them into moderns, they're not. But then his students and the students of his students, we see them again taking the fundamental teachings of Luther and Melanchthon and others, and then stripping them of all meaning, and again, medieval, basically stripping the medieval world off of this pearl, the medieval image of we're like pearls covered in mud, and we just need to be washed with grace. What they would do is take the Reformers' teachings and just wash the mud of the Middle Ages off of them, and then say, well, no, the early church is okay. We can quote from the early church fathers, but the Middle Ages, let's try and stay away from them.
Like as a proof text, not a...
Yes, as a proof text.
They're not going to quote a lengthy portion of Ambrose's sermon on the sacrament.
Right. And so by the time you get to quote-unquote Orthodox Christianity, in all of its different strains, the poetry has been stripped.
Yeah.
The beauty
not entirely.
Stripped.
Not entirely. I mean, there are exceptions.
No, not entirely.
There are exceptions.
I don't want to... No. But it has been stripped. And
there's Paul Gerhardt with the T at the end. 160 some just fantastic hymns, right, that are very devotional and mystical, which has been used as a criticism against him. And it's like
exactly my point. Yes, is that
you're taking liberties with the story and you're expanding upon, and right. I'm a poet, right?
But when you read Lewis on Discarded Image, the medieval are cataloging everything. They're looking for the universal tie that holds everything together, from the smallest to the greatest things.
So bread, water, rocks.
You see Gerhardt with a T, and you're like, why aren't there more guys like Gerhardt with a T? And the answer is because he's the exception now. He just is. And then by the time you get to the Enlightenment and modernity, it's just...
Well, I think there's a direct correspondence. There's a direct correspondence to comfort. And... Gerhardt is living in a very uncomfortable time with the plague and mass death, right? And of his family, his children. So he's discomforted, and so he seeks comfort in God's word and confessing that word in song and poetry. So,
but whereas
if you're stuck in a university and if you're provided for, you've got a salary. I just don't know what's going to come out of that. I mean, maybe God can still work through that, but it's not going to be the same thing.
Right. Well, to your point then, right, is that we have the physical manifestation of death laying right in front of you. And as we said, he's doing, if you he's doing like 7 funerals a day, basically.
Right.
Like on average, 7 funerals a day. So
we figured out it
doing
was
mass
30,
funerals.
actually. It was 30.
Yeah, that's right, 30, right. So, yeah, 30 a funeral. Yeah, 30 funerals every
On
second,
average.
like a day. Yeah, on average. So he's doing mass funerals, he's doing individual funerals, and burying his family and so on. So you have the physical, the material manifestation of death. It's right in your face. You're smelling it.
Mm-hmm.
You're living through it. You're looking across the table at an empty chair. And if you don't have a counter set of images to, like, you can't counter that with forensic language.
No.
You can't just say, death, you are conquered by Christ. Fine. Now what? No, I need to literally put something in front of me, an object of faith that I can literally cling to and hold up in front of my face and stare at, that stands between me and death, to say, this is not the final image. Yeah. There's this. This image is more important.
And there's that power of singing against evil, right? We talked about that
but I'm
way
saying,
at the beginning.
What are you directing your words at? Right?
Yeah.
You're directing your words at an object. And the words seek the object. This is why Jesus is the object of our faith, and why the Bible is so illustrative with these images. So that, like Dr. Luther says, when you sit next to the bedside of someone who's dying, hold the cross in front of their eyes. Like literally, not like metaphorically, like I'm going to say, do you see, the cross of Jesus? Like hold an actual crucifix in front of their face to remind them they're baptized, and to say, do you believe that you will live forever in the resurrection?
Although I will say, I was praying the crucifixion from Matthew with someone dying yesterday, and I know that's the cross, and he was weeping, and then for joy in the resurrection. I mean, from the word, right, itself.
Yeah, I just think you should be wearing a crucifix.
I know.
I just think you.
I didn't. I got the call. I didn't have time to come stop by and get.
I know. I'm just saying.
Up
I
and
think
everything.
that there's more to that has to be done.
Oh, of course. Well, of course. There's a visual. He can't see at the moment, so that's fine.
Oh, then it doesn't matter either. But you can put the cross in his hand so you can clutch it.
That's true.
And feel
that's
it.
right. Well, I held his hand, right? So I was there, right? And that's the other thing, especially with dying. It's like hold their hand, touch, give them the blessing on their head.
Right.
Yeah.
At the very
Let them know
least,
you're there. Yeah, you're there.
But that's what I mean. And it's a great point to linger on it for a second, is that we're so out of sync with symbol and image. We're so out of sync with this, the uniting of heaven and earth in these objects, that we don't even think about them until after the fact, when we sit down and ruminate on them like we are, which is kind of one of the benefits that we have of doing this, is that, like I said, I started, I used to put my hand on the children's head to bless them at the rail. But then last week we were talking about it, so now I make the sign of the cross with my thumb like I did at their baptism. Mm-hmm. And
yeah, I do both.
It may mean nothing to anybody, but it means everything to me, And catechetically, then, when they come up and they come into confirmation, I'm going to teach them with that. I can use that to teach them. Yeah. And then they can pass that on to others.
Of a good physical touch. I mean, I know we have good touch, bad touch. That's the thing with kids.
Well, that's the problem, is that so much of the world is telling the kids now, everything's bad. Like all touching is bad. Don't let anybody touch you.
This blessing is going. This is for you, and I'm going to demonstrate this by actually being bound to you, right? Hand to head. Yeah.
Well, it's like God puts the tau, the T-A-W, the ta on Cain's head to mark him, and I think Chad has written several articles about this. It is the sign of the cross that he puts on Cain.
Well, it has to be.
Because that's why Cain is murdered. Eye for an eye.
What else would mark him free from death? Right.
Right. And then he's told, go build the city of refuge. You're like, the city of refuge? Well, that's the church. That's the heavenly Jerusalem. That's Zion.
People miss the mercy for Cain. I don't know. They just they focus on.
Well, they confuse Revelation with the whole mark of the beast with the mark of Cain. They fuse the two together. Thank you, modern evangelicals.
Oh, I didn't even think of that. Ouch.
When I was new, that's what I was taught, is that the mark of the beast is the mark of Cain. Like they were just fused together.
Gross.
Yeah. Again, you just absorb stuff uncritically. You don't know any better. You don't think about it. And then somebody says, by the way, these are two different things. You're like, oh, yeah, cool. Okay. Nice. Because again, biblically, if it was the mark of Cain, they would have used that term in Revelation and vice versa. But God never says receive the mark of the beast. He says receive this mark, this tau on your forehead, to mark you as one. Now go build a city of refuge. You're like, well, where else are we talked about? Where else in the Bible is the city of refuge?
Salem.
David talks about it in the Psalm. Yeah, Salem.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And yet out of the city of refuge, he goes out and builds weapons and instruments and gives birth to Lamech and Nimrod.
But you have Jesus then. I mean, why is he so upset about
I'm pointing out again the simultaneity of Cain is covered by God's mercy and grace and protection, and then Cain uses that to then just go sin more.
I know.
And yet God doesn't destroy the city of refuge. He destroys the tower. Because he lets them go. And he lets them go. And he lets them pull reality and stretch it as far as he wants them to stretch it. And then he says, hey, and then they're chanting, come down, Lord, come down, Lord. And then he's like, all right, we're coming.
Yeah, intense.
And then he basically sneezes on the tower and it collapses. He just blows. The breath of God blows, and the wind of the Lord blows down the tower. The same wind, by the way, that parted the Red Sea for the Israelites. It's the same wind.
And brought the quail, right?
And brought the quail. Exactly. It's the same wind that drew the land out of the chaos, out of the water in the beginning.
And then blew on the apostles and gave them the Spirit.
And blew on the breath, Spirit, God. It's all the same. Again, I went down that rabbit hole for like 3 minutes in Bible class, and they're just like, what are you talking about? I'm like,
I've been drilling it for so many years here. The children are right. They're always like, oh, breath, Spirit, that's Spirit. I'm like, okay, yeah.
Yeah, but here's where I got them. I go, you do realize that when it's windy like this, that's actually God.
It blows when and where he wills. Yeah.
I'm like, the wind is the wind is the Lord. Like, that's God. So when you're standing outside and it's windy, you really realize that's God. And they're like, wait, what? I'm like, that's exactly what happens. The wind of the Lord, the breath of God blows. And they're like, where does it say that? I'm like, it's in the text that we're reading right now.
Wow.
I'm like, it's all the same word. And they're like, wait. I'm like, yeah, chew on that one for a while. And so but the point is then I've given them a theological imagination so that when they're out in their garden or out in the backyard or out,
you can enjoy
and the wind is blowing. They're like, oh no, God's right here. But do you like it? Is it a gracious wind? Or is it
you can meditate upon it. You can meditate upon it. Say the wind is blowing.
Correct.
And this is as the Spirit is blown on me in baptism, or it's connecting me to these Old Testament stories.
Well, what I explained is that does the breath of God in the wilderness, that is the breath of God that you feel when you're out in the backyard, is there any grace in that? Is there any forgiveness in that breath? No,
not without a word. You need a word of grace, right?
Yeah. So I said, let it blow you back into his house.
You need the prophet's blessing.
Right. Because out there in the wilderness, the Spirit is at work. Spirit, breath, wind, it's all the same. However, when you come in here, the Spirit will actually speak to you.
Yeah. Same with the sun.
Tornado goes,
right? The sun shall not strike them by day and the moon by night. Yeah.
It's lunacy. And so when you're in your backyard on a beautiful day, you praise God that he's with you, that his breath is literally breathing on you right now. But when a tornado tears your backyard out at its roots, it's the same breath. It's the same God. It's the same breathing of the Spirit. But it's not for you for the forgiveness of sins. See, this is what we've done by reducing everything to just forensic categories. In the world, God is everywhere. But no, don't talk in abstract terms. Actually describe biblically how.
Well, I don't have any problem saying he's everywhere, but is he there for you?
Right. But I'm saying you need to describe it and you need to frame, you need to give them that model so that when they look at a tree, they're not just looking at a tree. And when they feel the wind on their face, it's not just wind. It's not just an abstract thing. It's the breath of God. Right. That's what it means that he fills the entire creation with his presence. But that breath that's breathing on you in the backyard is not going to forgive your sins when that storm comes through and tears down your house. This is what Job is wrestling with throughout the entirety of that story. And so you as a pastor can stand in the backyard and you can talk about the weather and, hey man, it's been a good season. Like, we're probably going to have a bad season this year. I'm actually really scared that God's judgment is upon us in Minnesota for the enormous and egregious sins that we have committed against him in the last 3 or 4 years.
Sure.
And I'm saying to people, I'm like, you have to understand that the signs are obvious if you understand, if you work within this model that the Bible lays out for us, and that it's not comforting. It's not meant to be comforting. It's meant to drive you back to where he says he will be for you. And you have to, if you want any kind of consolation or comfort in the midst of this turmoil and conflict and discord, you're not going to find it in your backyard or at City Hall, or, you're not going to find it there because it's not promised to be there for you. And so be a good citizen and be a good neighbor and do those things, but understand that in the end, when the wind comes and knocks the roof down and your house collapses and you lose your treasures, there's only one place you can flee to. There's only one city of refuge, and it's here. And so when I ask you, why do you even need a pastor? That's why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm the watchman. I'm the gatekeeper. I'm the doorman. to the house of the Lord. That's what I'm here to do, is to open it as you come running up the drive to say, come in here, there's sanctuary. From God, not the world. The world is the least of your problems.
God's judgment,
but rather how
wrath,
God is at work in the world for judgment or for redemption.
Right.
And if we don't have this big picture view, then again, Luther understands the cosmic categories and the cosmic
I think so.
war.
Yeah.
He talks about it constantly.
I think so.
And because he's medieval, he's very medieval. And yet you can hear the hints of modernity, what modernity is going to be coming from the Reformation, right? This hinge.
Mm-hmm.
And then by the 1600s, you really hear it. And of course, then we get into the 17 and 1800s and it's, coalescing.
Yeah.
And I think this is very important that we recover. This is why we're reading this stuff. And this is why it excites us and our theological imaginations, because like you noted, when we say, Luther talks about, and his students talk about, and others talk about, read the Bible as a whole, right? See it as a whole. Really what we're saying is recognize the patterns. That's what you mean by patterns, is like, if you read the patterns, if you recognize the patterns in the Bible, now you'll start reading the entire Bible as one whole story divided into 66 books. And then when you look up from those books and you go out the door into the world, you'll see it everywhere. That's the point.
You can't help it. Yeah.
And so when we say, think biblically or live biblically or have a biblical worldview, it's not a moralistic worldview. That's downstream of what we're talking about. You don't have to be a
shallow
Christian
view,
to be
isn't
moral.
it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But rather understand that there's a cosmic model, a cosmic view here that even the reformers are tapped into. And so if you're not reading it in the reformers, then you're not paying attention, or you're just not seeing it. And so go back and reread these things. Go read Luther's letters of spiritual counsel and notice he's appealing to these higher truths, these higher meanings of things. But he's also simultaneously reacting against the kind of thoughtless superstition that has now calcified around these things and turned them into idols. And so people are literally worshiping the sacraments as if worshiping them is the thing that gets me the blessing, or running from door to door on Easter Sunday so that they see the elements lifted up, elevated, and they hear the words and go, I've got it. Now I'm going to go to the next one. I'm going to get 17 blessings today. I don't have to go to church for the rest of the year. That's what he's fighting against. And so you can't have the symbols without the story, and you can't have the story without the symbols. They're hand in hand. They're united. And when you separate them out, then you start either worshiping nature, as you noted, without God, or you start worshiping God and rejecting nature and saying, well, anything material is bad. And now we're back in Neoplatonism again.
Yeah, and fair enough that Luther isn't going to be dealing with the same challenges that we are.
Correct.
So he can presume symbol and story, and he teaches it actively. And his focus or emphasis is going to be on a different kind of rejection of the word than what we're seeing today, which is like these stories don't even matter, which is just wow. I mean, really sad and depraved. So
it is, because again, it strips us of our anchor, our foundation, everything. It's depressing. Listen to the Banned Books podcast so we can set your imagination on fire, and you can start reading
3 hours.
This is a good one today. We were charged. I had coffee this morning for the first time in a long time, actually.
I had a migraine today. Maybe that works too. I don't know.
Very cool. So thank you, 1517, for the platform so we can have this conversation. Thank you to all of you who are listening. I hope that this was helpful and edifying and gives you comfort and consolation that, again, the gates are open for you. And if you're not sure, if you're not confident in that, if you're not comforted by that, go to your pastor and ask, can you give me the gifts? I need the gifts. And
absolutely,
a good and godly pastor will say, this is fantastic. I'd love to. Let's do it right now.
Right. Precisely.
There, no pressure.
All right.
Just remember, you are a part of the host of heaven. You are a saint. You are a beloved child of God. So go in the peace and freedom of Christ to serve the Lord. Peace.
Could have said amen or something, but
I know. I gave pause like a good pastor, and you didn't say it, so I
know. That's all right. It's all good. It's just I'm seeing spots.
That's good. You're coming close. You're coming to the liminal edge with me.
I like 2 weeks ago I couldn't even breathe, and now I can't do this without spots. All right,
that's good.
I've got someone here for an appointment, so I'm gonna have to bow out.
No worries.
We need to have a conversation.
Very good.
So, yeah, it was good.
Thanks, everybody.
Adios.